For anyone that's listened to any of the episodes or taken a look at the guest list that I've been able to put together in the 45 now episodes that I have, you'll notice that we've been very, very fortunate to have an unbelievable guest list in that we have some very smart people coming on the show and always more than willing to provide information and educate others on what they have learned and become experts at so that all of us can improve at both our game and our life. Well, today's guest is no exception to that. He is one of the smartest people in the golfing world, even though he might not be a household name to the masses, but he is a very, very well-known name to anybody who, let's say, is a golf fanatic or is in the coaching and instruction industry, because the work that he is doing from a technological and from a scientific side is helping coaches like myself help to improve or give us the information to allow our students, meaning you, to help and improve at faster rates, at higher rates of improvement, and all those wonderful things. His name is Dr. Scott Lynn, and he is currently the professor of biomechanics and kinesiology at Cal State Fullerton, and he is also the director of research and education for Swing Catalyst. Now, anybody who has used Swing Catalyst in a lesson or as they worked on their game knows how amazing and the benefits that it provides. And for anyone that is not familiar with it, well, today you're going to find out exactly what it is and how it utilizes pressure mapping and force mapping to allow you to hit the ball better, more efficient, straighter, longer, all of those different things. It deals largely in forces, and what a lot of you are probably very familiar with if you watch golf on TV, or it's a big word in the golfing world today, is ground reaction forces, and how to utilize those to improve your game and your scores. Not only that, but Dr. Lynn talks about the considerable amount of work that he's done with some of the top coaches in the world to take what he finds in the scientific side and how to utilize it in the application side. Coaches like PGA Coach of the Year Mike Adams and E.A. Tischler and others around the world. We also discuss what he thinks is going to be the next big thing in the game that's going to help people just improve to an entirely new level, and that is in motor learning science. So be sure to listen to that portion of the show. But one of the big things I think you're going to take from this, outside of the amount of knowledge and education that he brings and bestows upon all of us, is the passion that he has not only for the game of golf, but in helping everybody improve and have more fun. And if you don't love Dr. Scott Lynn by the end of listening to this episode, then then maybe you've got to take a look in the mirror. So, as always, please sit back, relax, give a big Golf 360 welcome to my guest today, Dr. Scott Lynn. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Golf 360 podcast. I'm the host, Pete Popovich. So you may be asking yourself, what is Golf 360? And Golf 360 is a show that was designed to introduce you to people associated with the game of golf to help you improve not only at your game, but also your life. Almost all of our guests are from within the industry in some way, shape, or form, but some of the guests we have are from outside the industry, and it mainly revolves around the business world with a few others scattered in here and there. Now, all of the guests that we have a few things in common. One, they all were highly successful and accomplished in their field. Two, each has something to pass along that will help you in your game and your life. And three, they were all more than willing to give back by passing along the things that they use to help them in their career, and even some of the mistakes that they made so that others don't make them in their journey. So I hope you find listening to them as enjoyable as I did interviewing them, and that each and every one of you benefits from the information that they so willingly and graciously pass along. Hey, everybody, I want to give a big shout out to a new sponsor of the Golf 360 podcast, and that's Affinity Wealth Management Group. We all work exceptionally hard for our money, and none of us can afford to let that fall into the dark abyss of the big box financial service firms and their jack of all trades and master of none mantra, which basically means you become a number within a cookie cutter model that's also often accompanied by massive fees. Your future deserves more than average returns and little attention. At Affinity Wealth Management, they ensure that your financial goals receive highly individualized, tailored attention from experts, not just advisors, who are in the industry to be great and not average. As a client of Affinity Wealth, you receive a customized solution to your customized life, keeping in mind your family's financial situation, values, and risk tolerance. Call Affinity Wealth today for a no-cost consultation with one of their experts at 724-754-8200. Again, that's 724-754-8200. Or you can also check them out on the web at www.affinitywealthmg.com. That's AFFINITYWEALTHMG.com. This podcast is brought to you in part by Just Thrive Probiotic. You may be surprised to learn that your digestive system is the key to creating and maintaining the quality of your physical, mental, and emotional health, and it's one of the body's most essential systems. That's why the majority of nutritionists today highly recommend probiotics as an indispensable nutritional supplement. As a discriminating consumer, you've probably been searching for a probiotic that is proven, potent, and effective, and you found it. Just Thrive is your best choice for maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Just Thrive Probiotic captures the power of hundreds of thousands of years of nature's design with a specialized bacillus strain formulation that guarantees survivability through the stomach and upper digestive system. Supports optimum gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. Great for adults, kids, and the whole family. Use promo code GOLF360 at www.thriveprobiotic.com for 10% off your order. Okay, it's a pleasure of mine to welcome the very famous in the golf industry and the very, very smart Dr. Scott Lynn. Doctor, thank you for coming on the show.
I don't know about the famous part, but thank you.
Well, in the coaching ranks, as I posted on my social media, you were coming on and reached out to some other instructors who have been on that are very well known, and we'll get into that later. But yeah, Doc is a very, very smart person, and very lucky to have you on. So appreciate you making the time.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
You know, I try to find positives in anything I can. And one thing COVID has allowed for me is to have guests such as yourself. You're world-renowned experts in various fields, and they've all been able to come on the show. And when we talked the other day, you had mentioned the university has been closed for a year, where you work out of, Cal State Fullerton. And
yep.
I guess one of the questions that came up was, what have you been doing to keep yourself occupied for that time?
Well, I'm still teaching my courses online. So all my classes at the university are online. So, I mean, that still keeps me relatively busy. I was kind of lucky before the pandemic. Through the work I've been doing for Swing Catalyst, I had to travel quite a bit, and traveling necessitated that I miss the odd class. And so we have a TV studio on campus where I went in and taught my lectures in front of like a green screen, it was almost like a weatherman. And they like superimposed my slides over my shoulder, and even they superimposed like some videos, and I like pointed at stuff. So they're relatively well produced lectures. And so I had those already done because I had them in the can just in case I had to miss a certain lecture. I would say, hey, there's no class next Thursday because I'll be in Tokyo or whatever. But it's going to be posted online. You have to watch it. And so, I've been relatively lucky that I had that content already. So I kind of, without knowing it, prepared myself for a pandemic, which has been really good. But then the golf world, as you know, has taken off. I mean, every golf instructor that I know is busier than they've ever been before in their lives because of, people taking up the game because there was really nothing else to do last summer, or last year. And so it's been really good for Swing Catalyst. I think we've had our best sales months consecutively. I think the last 6 or 7 months we keep beating our record, and the company's been around since 2008. So, having that kind of sales has been really good for us, which has kept us really busy. And we have a lot of new stuff coming out, and there's been a lot of, things we need to work on. So, I think it's been kind of a blessing for Swing Catalyst and for the golf industry as a whole. So I've been keeping really busy with the golf stuff. So, although my formal research that I've been doing at the university, I haven't been able to do because I haven't had access to my lab. Luckily, I have a Swing Catalyst in my garage in the back here. And so I can do some work for them and webinars and education stuff. We've done a ton of that stuff as well. So yeah, I've been keeping myself busy and also working on my own game because I love this game as much as anyone and like to play it well.
Has it gotten better? Because, the Hilton Head area is mostly a retirement area. And for decades, I've seen as people retire and they say, I can't wait, I'm going to play 4 or 5 days a week now. And I can't wait for my handicap to be cut in half. And next thing they know, they're mad, they're agitated, they're not happy anymore because they playing more, but their game isn't getting any better. So I hope with the connections you have and your own system with Swing Catalyst that your handicap is going in the right direction.
Yeah, I feel like I just understand my swing so much better because I think in the past when I played golf and I grew up playing golf in Canada where you didn't touch a club from maybe November 1st until middle of April or so. And I found that, I would get in a groove when I was timing my swing well. And when I was, working on my game all the time in like middle of July or so. And I would start playing pretty well then, but like at the start of the season and, sometimes end of the season wouldn't be so good. But I think now I can take some time off and still really understand kind of what I need, the ingredients in my swing that I need to hit it well. Mm-hmm. And I think, my game, I'm definitely a lot longer than I used to be. I was out in Arkansas. I'm doing some work now. I guess we'll probably get into this later, with an orthopedic surgeon there named Lowry Barnes. And so we were out there and we played his course, which is called Elotion, which was started by one of the former, what did they call him? The head of Augusta National. So I think the guy from Arkansas was the chairman of Augusta National. Yeah. So he was chairman in the 90s, I believe, and then moved back to Arkansas and started this course. It's unbelievable, but the back tees are 7,600 yards, I believe, where, in the past I would never play from that long. And I played from back there and, didn't even seem that long to me. It was, I had a little, couple hiccups around the greens, but, I think it definitely has helped my own game because I really understand what the elements are that I need to make my swing better. And I understand when the ball starts doing crazy things, why it's doing crazy things. Mm-hmm. Having worked on it enough times. The only problem is, especially during COVID, I worked in my garage. That's all I did because I'm not a member at a private course, and a lot of the private courses put in rules that only members could play. Right. So I really had nowhere to play, and the public courses were just jammed. So I just hit balls and played like virtual golf in my backyard. But it's a perfect lie, and it's a flat lie, and there's no wind, and so once I finally got back out on the golf course, I hit some squirrely shots because there's a lot of things about playing golf that you really can't replicate indoors.
No kidding. Isn't that the
but
truth?
But it's it's a constant struggle, right? I mean, it's not an easy game. Even the best in the world are constantly tinkering, constantly trying to get better, and I think that's what's so fun about it. I mean, all those retirees. My dad's 81, still plays 5 days a week up in Canada when he can, and he's constantly tinkering, right, trying to get better, trying to find a way to knock a couple shots off. So I think that's the great part about the game is, whether I think I started the game at around 4 or 5 years old and all the way till, I'm hoping my dad has still another 5 to 10 years of going out there and trying to find it and get better. So, it's a great game that way that you can play it your whole life. And no matter what level you're constantly trying to get better.
Absolutely. You had mentioned the course being 7,600 yards, and there's a course not far from Hilton Head. It's in Jasper County, which is the next county north of Beaufort County, and there's a course there called Congaree, and I don't know if you've heard, but the Canadian Open is going to be there this year, which is the Canadian Open in South Carolina.
Right. I've been thinking about trying to contact them because I know they have a mission of kind of education and helping people through the game of golf and supporting education. And I don't know if they have any professors on their board, but that'd be something that I'd love to give back to the game in that way for sure, because I really like what I've read about the course and their mission towards helping people get into the game. Because I think it's really helped me, get to where I am. Obviously, it's kind of a big part of my career, but I think, the lessons you learn growing up playing junior golf and, having to call penalties on yourself and be honest and all of those things, I think the game is just such a good thing for kids to get involved in. So if I could get involved in that would be great.
I know one of the ambassadors, he's a good friend of mine that That's what they call their membership.
Yep.
And I'll try to get you guys together or at least find out from him who you would need to talk to. My brother's also the PXG territory manager, and they're a big account of his. So
Okay.
if I can get you in touch with at least one of the pros or the GM or somebody to introduce you guys, and then you can take it from there, especially once they find out who you are.
I've heard about it, and I kind of just started reading about it when I read that story about how they're moving the Canadian Open that week to that course. And,
it's an amazing place.
Yeah, and I like the mission of the place, because I find a lot of golf courses are just all about money, right? It's just all about how they can bring in more and more money, and this place seems to be a little different. It seems to have a bigger purpose, so I like that about it.
Yeah, their money is not an obstacle.
Right. Right.
One of the, not to get off track too much, but from what I could read, and I'm sure you probably read on it too, and when I'm there and just talking to the staff, and it was a real working, like almost 300-year-old plantation, and the winding road in has some oak trees on it, and I mean they've got to be 16 foot in diameter.
Oh, wow.
And I asked some of the guys in the pro shop, I said, do you know how old those are by any chance? And they said they had an arborist out not long ago, and he marked it somewhere at 260 to 275 years old each.
Wow.
I mean, they're incredible. Gorgeous trees.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that part of the world, it does have some amazing trees and amazing, natural habitats. Because I've played some golf in the area. My good friend Jason Bale was the pro at
Belfair. That's right across the street
from
my community.
Right, and I going to visit him that drive-in, I was just like, man, I've never drove down Magnolia Lane, but if it's nicer than that, I don't know how it could get nicer than that.
Yes, but Belfair is a beautiful. Congaree would be if someone put a gun in my head and said you got to pick one over the other, I'd probably give the edge to Congaree just because it's winding and the oak trees are bigger. I think because I've read, like I say, I live right across the street from Belfair, and I've read up on the history of the area and the plantation and the whole deal. And I want to say that those trees are right around 100 years old, maybe 150. Okay. So they were planted within a century, where the ones at Congaree, double, almost triple in age. So
right,
it just the majestic and the size and everything just is like wow. But yes, Belfair is a very, very close second, if it is a second.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a gorgeous part of the world, and our U.S. salesman, Tim Bejar, lives there, so I like to come visit whenever I can.
Yeah, Colin Swatton lives there too.
Yep. It's a big golf area, and I do some work with Tony Ruggiero, who's not far away at
Frederica.
At Frederica, yeah. So it's the only thing is those damn no-see-ums, they destroy me.
The deal on those is you either pray for wind. If it's ideal temperature, like between 60 and 72, you either pray for wind or you want it to get hotter or colder.
Or colder, right? Yeah, those things. I don't know. They love my blood or something, because every time I leave there, I have welts all over me, and I don't know. Like I grew up in Canada, where I used to get mosquito bites all the time, and a mosquito bite lasts a day or two, and then it goes away. Those things are with me for a good week and a half to 2 weeks after I leave there every time. So
a lot of us call it the state bird.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's a great spot, but yeah, I agree with you. Those bugs will get me.
I wanted to ask you, so there's a wide variety of people who listen to my show, hence, the name Golf 360, because it covers so many different aspects of golf and hopefully in life, the information that the guests come on that provide it. It's not just to improve golf, because there is the life component, right? We all try to improve. So for those who might be newer to golf or not as technically involved, or even those who are in the golf industry and they think they know but they aren't quite sure, can you just explain what a golf mechanist is?
A biomechanist?
Biomechanist. I'm sorry.
This is something that, my PhD supervisor always told me, hey, if you can't explain what you're doing to your grandmother who has no idea about anything, then you don't really understand it. And so, and it was the same thing when I teach my biomechanics classes at the university, because, a lot of people sign up for the class because you have to take it, and you get in there, and day one is, what is it? What is biomechanics? And so generally I draw a line through after the O and before the M. So we have the bio part, which is biology, right? Which is the study of living things. And then you have the mechanics part. And so mechanics, the classical definition is the influence of force on bodies. So we're basically studying how forces affect biological systems. And there are biomechanists that look at how forces affect trees, right? So there's wind forces that affect how trees grow, and there are people studying that kind of thing. There are people who study animals and how, I've seen some work about, horse gait and how horses move and how that forces affect all that. The biological system that I care about is the human being, the human body. And so it's basically the physics of the human body. So we're looking at how forces from the ground, from, the interaction with our environment, from our muscles, all affect kind of how we move. And I always say, I think biomechanics, there's kind of three main areas for biomechanics, and they all have to do with what you want to do to forces. And so one area would be ergonomics. So there's a lot of, people talk about ergonomically designed chairs and ergonomically designed whatever it is. I grew up in Canada, and there's now ergonomically designed snow shovels to allow you to, and so those are trying to minimize forces on the body, right? If I have to sit in my chair all day and type at my computer, we probably want to put you in a position that minimizes the forces going through your body so that you don't end up with a low back pain, or you don't end up with, carpal tunnel syndrome or whatever. So ergonomics is an area, and a lot of the people that I went to school with work because the Southern Ontario is very close to Detroit, and so there's a lot of car plants there, and so they work on the line in cars and as they put cars together to minimize the forces on people as they're working on that line. So that's one area. Sports biomechanics is where you generally try to maximize forces. I mean, I would say what Bryson has been doing recently has been a big exercise in sports biomechanics, right? What Chris Como and then have been working on is really how to maximize the amount of force that he's putting into that golf club to create the highest speeds he can and hit it as far as he possibly can. And so that would be pure sports biomechanics. And then the last one is one that I've been working on now with, I did a lot in my PhD with it, and now with the orthopedic surgeon in Arkansas, Dr. Barnes, we're going to do a lot of orthopedic biomechanics, which is trying to optimize forces. So to swing a golf club, there has to be a certain amount of force go through your body, and everybody's body is built slightly differently, and we want to make sure that we're putting the appropriate forces for your body. Because if you put a certain amount of force through a certain body, that could cause an injury. If through another body, it could be fine. And so orthopedic biomechanics, and I think, there's a lot of sport applications to orthopedic biomechanics. I think that's the work I'm going to start doing over there, is to try to optimize how you swing the golf club, because how you swing the golf club needs to be completely different from how somebody else needs to swing the golf club, because we're all built differently. We've all learned to move differently. There's a whole bunch of factors that enter into how we can most safely and effectively swing the golf club. And that's kind of my main area of research. I think, a side benefit of swinging the club more optimally for you is generally, speeds go up and the game becomes easier. You start hitting the center of the face more often, and you start being able to find your ball more often. But ultimately, I think it's about swinging the club the most optimal way you can for your own body and for how you've learned to move. Because most of us are not going to do the work to try to create different patterns of movement. So, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I've learned a ton from Mike Adams. I think he was the first, or I know he's the first golf teacher that I've seen that had a system to put people in little groups, right? So if you go see him for a lesson, he puts you through a whole bunch of little tests and says, okay, based on the results of your testing, you need to swing it in this fashion. And he guides your golf lesson relative to how you test it out in terms of how you're built and how you move. And I think that's how we need to go, because everybody's built differently, everybody moves differently, and to make this game a little bit easier. And I think that's why the game has become so hard, because we all look at Bryson and what he's doing and saying, and I think that's the kind of trend. I remember going for a golf lesson when I was in high school, I believe, and that was in the 90s, and Tiger was really good, and so they put me next to Tiger and said, "Oh, see how your hands are here and Tiger's hands are there." Right. Well, I'm not Tiger, right? And I remember playing terrible for a while after that. And I think part of the reason why I swing the way I do is because when I grew up in Canada, the very first athletic thing I ever did was ice hockey. So I think I was just old enough to stand up without falling down. My dad put skates on me and gave me a stick and sent me out on the ice. And so the way that you try to produce speed with a stick in your hand when you have knives on your feet and you're standing on ice is different than how you would produce motion, on a different surface. And so I think that I still play ice hockey. I'm in an old man league here in LA. So that's been, almost 40 years now of trying to produce speed with, knives on your feet on ice. And I think that really affects how I move with a golf club in my hand, because it's the same thing basically as trying to produce speed with a stick in your hand. And so I could try to overcome my 40 years of that pattern, but that would take a long time, and I'd probably play pretty terrible in the meantime. And so what Mike does is just match up what your body does the best and try to make that work for you. And so, so that's kind of the science that I've gone down, and meeting Mike really kind of revolutionized my thought process and how to do that. Mm-hmm. In science, every time I've done a golf biomechanics study, I get a ton of variability in my populations. One of the first ground force studies I did was I took the golf team members at my university. So they're all NCAA Division I golfers, plus handicap, shooting under par all the time. And I measured how they interact with the ground. So I measured the 3D ground reaction forces. And then I went into my kinesiology classes, and I said, anyone who's ever swung a golf club before but has never had a formal lesson, you can volunteer for this study. So I had a bunch of kids who are kinesiology students, who are young, athletic people who probably played a bunch of sports in their life, and probably gone to the driving range or to a Top Golf and smacked some balls around, but never had a formal lesson. And so the kinesiology students were like the beginner golfers, and so my study was to see the differences in ground force patterns. And if I just put two graphs in front of me, and one of them was a Division I NCAA golfer and one of them was a beginner, I couldn't tell the difference. Just based on how they, obviously, if you just looked at the club information and the ball information, you could definitely tell the difference. But through just the ground force patterns, there were things that, the beginners were doing that looked exactly like what some of the experts were doing, some things the experts were doing that looked exactly like what the beginners were doing. And so there's a lot of variability there. And so anytime in science when there's a lot of variability in your population, you have to do something called cluster analysis, mm-hmm. right? So you have to put a little box around a certain group of people and saying, hey, based on these characteristics, these people need these things. And based on these characteristics, these people need these things. And so that's kind of been my motivation towards the research that I'm doing now is to cluster people based on certain factors and then run. And that's exactly what Mike does when he teaches a golf lesson. He clusters people based on his little tests and teaches the lesson accordingly. So that's a kind of long answer, but essentially what biomechanics is the physics of the human body. So we want to see how the forces you put through your body and through the ground and into the club are affecting, and that's really what we're doing is looking at forces. And I think that the most important thing for me as a biomechanist is try to make things as simple as possible, because they can get extremely complex. There's a lot of complex equations and things, and the inverse dynamics models that Dr. Kwan and Dr. Sasha McKenzie are using. There's a lot of relatively complex math. I think mine's a little bit simpler in terms of the ground reaction forces that we're dealing with, but I think the key thing, and I took that away from one of the first meetings I had with my PhD supervisor, was to, if you can't explain it simply to your grandmother or to, a golf teacher who has, maybe not a PhD level education, then you don't really understand it. And so trying to make these things relatively simple and usable for, the average guy in his basement working on a swing, or the average golf teacher on the range working on a lesson with somebody. And so that's kind of been my goal, is to take it and try to make it as simple as possible and usable as possible. And I think I've done some decent job in that, but I think I can always get better and learn more and make a system that's a little more usable for everyone.
You had mentioned your entire life playing hockey, and then how it's had affected your or plays a role in the effect on your golf swing, maybe not the way that you want to. Can you explain that a little more?
Most people have seen, and this is kind of the story I tell in a lot of my education, the video online. If you haven't seen it, I would Google it on YouTube, golfers swinging on the ice. Mm-hmm. So there's a guy who went out on the ice. It looks like it's kind of late in the winter, early in the spring, when the ice is relatively thin because there's no snow around the outside. And he tries to take a swing, and you see his feet like spin out, right? And so he falls down, falls through the ice, and everybody laughs. But what you'll notice is as he goes into transition of his swing, his trail foot or his rear foot or his right foot, if he's a right-handed golfer, which he is, his trail foot moves away from the ball and his lead foot moves towards the ball. So that's how you have to push into the ground to create rotation. And if you think about it, if I went to take the cap off a water bottle, what do? Well, I push in one direction with my thumb and another direction with my finger. And that creates something called a force couple, which is two forces acting in opposite directions, which creates rotation. And that's what your feet do to the ground when you try to rotate in a golf swing. And everybody assumes that a golf is a very rotational sport, and right, everybody wants to get really open to the target line at impact, which is a very rotational type feel. And so golf is, I agree, it is a very rotational sport. But if you think about it, for me, for whatever number of years on the ice trying to hit a puck with a stick, you can't do that, right? Because if you have skates on, your feet would there's no resistance for going forward and backwards. So I learned to become very linear, very glidey, Mike Adams would call it. So, or it's kind of a move towards the target, basically. So there's really three ways we can move. Our human body can move in golf and in anything, right? We can move. A glide is kind of a frontal plane move. So you think of it as doing more like in a jumping jacks kind of plane. Rotation would be kind of twisting. And then the last one is jumping or just going straight up, or a sagittal plane type move. So there's really three ways we can do it. Mike Adams calls it a glider, a spinner, or a launcher.
Right.
So glide would be more of like a sway. Spin would be like a rotation. So you think of like Dustin Johnson, who's basically his belt buckles pointed at the target when he hits it. That would be a very rotational type swing. And then the third one would be a launcher. You think of like Justin Thomas, right, where he's literally almost off the ground. He's jumped, and jumping is a very sagittal plane type move. And so what I've learned from my own golf swing is based on growing up playing ice hockey, where you can't, I couldn't really produce that force couple on skates, or you can't, it's impossible. I became very glidey or very sway dominant in my golf swing. And most golf teachers, I know for several years, people are like, no, you don't sway in the golf swing. That's bad. You can't sway. You need to. And if you take the sway out of my golf swing, I hit it terrible and shorter and offline. And so that's something that I learned from Mike, is it's possible to have that pattern and still hit good golf shots if you match it up and you allow yourself to realize that that's not bad. That's just a thing. That is a way to move. And if we match it all up and make sure that everything else is working properly, you can hit good golf shots and find it and make birdies and do good things from there. So yeah, that's something, I think, my own case. And I think that's something that a lot of, golf biomechanists, and I think a lot of golfers learn a lot about the game by working on their own swings, because you know exactly what you're feeling and how you're moving. And I know what works for me and I know what doesn't work for me, but then I'll help somebody else with their game and I'll teach them almost the complete opposite of what I've been working on in my own swing, because their bodies are different than mine and they move differently than me. And one thing that I've been talking about quite a bit when it comes to the biomechanics of using the ground of the lower body is something that has been in the academic literature forever, and it's what your dominant leg is. What your strongest or most dominant leg is, I think, is really going to affect how you use the ground in golf, and especially if you've had any kind of major trauma. If you've had a joint replacement, if you're an older person with a joint replacement, or if you've had a massive injury to one leg or the other, or even if you've played a sport or done something throughout your life that's really created an imbalance in terms of which leg is stronger than the other leg. What I tell most people is you have two options. You can either go to the gym and work out that imbalance, which will probably take almost equal to the number of years that have caused you to create that imbalance, which is your whole life. And most people don't want to do that. And so why don't we just build the swing around what your current dominant leg is? And I think this is something, the dominant leg thing that I've been talking about is really closely correlated to what Mike Adams calls a post style. So a rear post, the golfer would have more of a right leg dominant swing pattern, or their right leg would probably be more dominant if I tested it. And so that's what I think my research has kind of gone down the road. And I never would have gone down that road if it wasn't for Mike introducing me to this posting style, right? So we had front post golfers, rear post golfers, and center post golfers. And, if I'm a right-handed golfer and I'm a front post golfer, my left leg better be pretty dominant because I kind of stay stacked on top of it.
And that's the stack and tilt theory, right? That predominantly stack and tilt.
Totally. So I think that's why, that particular method or that particular system has so much success with some people, is a lot of people are left leg dominant golfers, and that particular feel works really well if you're a left leg dominant golfer. If you're a right leg dominant golfer, that's probably the worst thing for you. And that is true of anything. I mean, I think I did my postdoc in Waterloo, Canada, with a PhD who is kind of the low back core stability expert of the world. Low back injury prevention. His name was Dr. Stuart McGill, and I remember his spine biomechanics class that I took while I was there. He comes in and says, if you give the same exercise to 10 people with a low back problem, you might help 4 of them, you might hurt 4 of them, or you might not do nothing to 2 of them and put 4 of them in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to know who's who. And I think it's the same thing with a golf, any kind of golf drill or any kind of golf thought or feel. It could be the best thing in the world for one person and the worst thing in the world for the other person. And as golf teachers and golfers, we got to know what's best for us or what's best for our students. And if you just guess, if you just say, hey, I like this drill, I'm going to give it to everyone, that's probably not the best way to do it. And I think that's what Mike has taught us, is that we need to tailor our instruction to the human being standing in front of us. And I like I always use the term human beings are messy. All of us are extremely messy. You know, we have physical messiness because all of us aren't built the same way. When I teach an anatomy class at my university, and you teach kind of the average anatomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody's the same. I was just in meetings with a bunch of spine surgeons last week in Arkansas, and the posterior part of our spine, we have these little things called facet joints. And they're these 2 flat surfaces that fit together. And if there's 2 flat surfaces that fit together, they're going to move, they're going to allow motion in some planes, but restrict motion in other planes. And what we know, I know what the anatomy book tells me about how those little facet joints are aligned. But when I talk to them, and these are people that are opening up humans all the time and just physically staring at their facet joints, there's like, man, some people they're aligned like this, some people they're aligned like that, some people have one of them aligned like this and another one aligned like that. Like, so there's a ton of variability in how human beings are made and how human beings are built. And I think that's something that we need to start getting at to figure out, hey, how are you built and how can we move best for how your anatomy looks. Dr. Stuart McGill in Canada taught me about how people have different hip joints. He does a lot of work in lifting, like Olympic lifting and big heavy lifting. And he says that, if you look at if you look at the Olympic lifting competitions, what countries win those competitions? It's
Russia,
always the Eastern
Bulgaria,
European countries.
yeah,
Bulgaria, Romania. They have a type of hip joint that allows them to lift heavy things off the floor. Then he calls the Scottish or the Celtic hip joint, which is not designed to lift heavy things off the floor. And he actually shows some x-rays of people who have a Eastern European hip and people who have more of a Scottish-based hip. And that might be why the Scottish people invented golf, right? Because they're like, we're terrible at lifting heavy things off the floor. Let's twist a little more. And I don't know. But that's something that I'm super interested in. And it's something that I don't think there is a lot of good information out there. I think Mike has started that process. There's a lot of tests that he does that looks at how you're built. So he looks at your forearm length versus your upper arm length, and that will help determine kind of how steep or how shallow your swing
plane,
is.
your lead arm plane.
Totally. And then he looks at your wingspan versus your height. So all of these things are just anthropometric measures about how we're built. But I think we can dig a little deeper than that. And this is what I'm super excited to get working on with some of these surgeons in Arkansas who are we're going to be able to take advanced imaging of people and look at their hip sockets and see what they look like, and then see how that relates to how they should most optimally swing the golf club. And I think hopefully this is going to guide us down a path that's going to make golf instruction much more personalized and much more effective. Because, like you say, a lot of people that retire and say, I'm going to play 5 days a week and take lessons, and they get worse.
Right.
And that's not that tells me we're not doing things as optimally as we possibly should be.
And Mike's program, it's called Biodynamics, isn't it?
Bioswing Dynamics.
Bioswing Dynamics, yes. And he's with his guys that learn E.A. Tischler, I think Terry Rolls are 2 of his top proteges, I guess I call them.
Yeah,
they're doing some great things on their own. But
they have been, yeah. So they're, and I think, Mike's great. Mike really is open to learning new things, which I think is the best thing about him. I forget where we were, Australia, I believe, and we were doing a little seminar, and there was an older guy in the crowd, and Mike said something, and he put up his hand. He's like, hey, I came to see you like 20 years ago, and you said this, and now you're saying the opposite. And he was saying it as a negative thing, and I piped up and said, listen, Mike, do you want to learn from somebody who's saying the same things they said 20 years ago and just sticking by their guns, even though we've learned new things since 20 years ago? And he's like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. I would rather learn from somebody like Mike who's willing to say, hey, I tried this 20 years ago. I was wrong. This is way better. Let's do this now.
Well, I saw one of his lectures. It might have been in Australian. You might have been there. I can't remember, but where he took the two twins. They were Australian PGA guys, and they were identical twins. And
wow.
And he said, even your twin is not going to have the same swing that you have.
No, totally.
And I found that fascinating because I knew, as we talked the other day when we connected it, I did a lot of very in-depth high-end club fitting. High-end, not meaning expensive, but neurological systems and what the human produces and all those things. And
right.
I knew from that and those I learned from at that time that you could have two identical twins that would have different load patterns. And even though, let's say, the frequency of the shaft would be the same, the profile of the shaft would be completely different. And you could never swap the drivers because the other one would think it was horrendously bad.
Yeah. No, totally.
Same length, weight, swing weight, flex frequency, grip, the whole thing. But the shaft profile was completely opposite, and it would wreak havoc on their swing, similar to what you were saying. But that was the first time I seen anybody outside of that, or at least that I had heard say, I don't care if this is your twin, you guys measure different and you're going to swing different.
Yep. No, that is, I mean, no two humans are the same. Like even identical twins, they might have a lot of the same, genetic dispositions, but they haven't had the exact same, environmental conditions through their whole lives. One of them might have hurt their ankle at some point and adapted their movement for that. And so there's so many different combinations, and human beings are messy. We have physical messiness in terms of how we're built. We have mental messiness in terms of, I know myself, when I was a little kid, I hit these little baby draws when I was, 10, 11, 12, 13, and I'd shoot, in the high 70s, mid 70s. I was beating a lot of older people, playing really well. And then I think I got to 13 or 14 and I grew a foot and a half in a year, and my little baby draw turned into a snap hook that basically was coming back at me, and I couldn't find the thing anymore. Yeah, and my 75 turned into a 95, and because I could never find the golf ball anymore, because it's hard to talk to a snap hook. That thing doesn't stop running until it hits something, or water, or trees, or something. And at that time when you're 13 or 14, and I don't think Mike Adams' system wasn't around. No one knew how to help me. One thing I learned from Mike is I'm a very under gripper, so my right hand needs to be very strong on the golf club.
Right.
And most people used to think, well, a strong grip means more hook, and a weak grip means less hook. So all these teachers were trying to weaken my right hand, which just causes the face to shut even more on me. And so, the thing just started hooking more and more and more. And the game became very frustrating at that point, especially for the mentality of a 14-year-old boy. It was not a lot of fun. And I think that's the part where, a lot of people could quit the game. But that created some mental messiness in me. I hate to see the ball hook. And so,
you're opposite of me. I hate to see it go high right.
Right. Yeah. I don't mind. If I hit a little fade overcuts, I'm fine with that. A snap hook is like my death shot. I can't stand to see that. And we've seen that in some of the best players. We've been fortunate enough to work with Matt Kuchar a couple times on the plate, and we were at the PGA show one year, and Mike and I worked with him on the plate, and Mike was able to get him an extra 10 to 15 miles an hour at club speed in like a couple minutes. He was just smashing these shots, and Chris O'Connell, his coach, was there when we were doing this, and he kind of came over to me. He's like, this is really cool stuff. I like this, but I just want to let you know, if one shot goes left, he aborts mission, and he's back to his old thing. Because he has the same thing. He has that mental messiness from seeing the ball go left. So he hits these little pull fades that start down the left side, and they're kind of wipey, and they don't go very far. That's why I think he plays well when the golf course is really firm and fast, and he can get it rolling down there. But he I think, because he's seen it a couple times now where we've got him on the plate and we've got him some extra speed. He purchased the plate for his house, and he's trying to, I think he's working on trying to put all the pieces together to kind of put that more, that shot or that swing with more speed in play. Because, you can't argue with Matt Kuchar's results, right? He's been one of the best players in the world forever. He knows where the club is, or he knows where the ball is going. It never goes left. He hits these little pull cuts that end up where he wants them to go. But I think he's seeing now with all these kids that hit it so far that he's going to need a little more speed to compete over the next couple of years. So, so he's one of our tour users. He has a plate in his house, and I'm sure he's working on a way to make this swing that has a little bit more speed, put it in play in a way that it's not going to go left for him, because he has that mental messiness, as do I, and I think all golfers have that, right? You have that shot that you just hate, that shot that you're just like, oh, that thing just drives me insane. And that's something you should probably know if you're going to teach a golf lesson to somebody, right? You should start to get into their head and understand what their mental messiness is, what their physical messiness is. And that's what I tell golf teachers is your job is to figure out the messiness of that human that's standing in front of you, and try to optimize it in the best way possible. And we all have our little things, right? And I've exploded both of my ankles playing football and one playing ice hockey. My most recent one, I had a bimalleolar fracture of my left ankle playing ice hockey 3 or 4 years ago, and obviously that really has affected how I use the ground and changed how I swing the golf club as well. And I think that injury has really helped me understand, because as I was coming back from that injury and I knew that my left side didn't work very well, I had to alter how I did things just to play and just to hit it, just to find it. And so being able to make those adaptations, I think, is something that can really help you in understanding how to alter the swing to based on all these little inefficiencies and messy things that we have in our bodies and in our minds and all over. So
what Mike had his what's the name of the book? I got it sitting right over there on my coffee table. His book from a number of years ago.
The Laws of the Golf Swing, or whatever.
Yeah, with TJ Tomasi and what's the other guy? Jim Hardy, I think. Dr. Jim Hardy was the other one. Now, so he kind of had his measurements, and like you mentioned, the forearm length versus the upper arm length. I think did he have the post system back then, or was that later on?
I'm not sure. I don't know the timeline on the whole thing, but it's interesting to me, and I'm getting the same way, because Mike and I had worked on a book several years ago, and it still hasn't come out, because he and I learn new stuff all the time. And if we published a book today and it came out, I don't know how long it takes to publish a book, maybe 6 months from now or a year from now, by the time it come out, we'd be like, oh man, I wish we put this and that and the next thing in it, because we're learning stuff all the time. So, so I think it was interesting. We did all this work with Matt Rudy, and we worked on this book, and now I read it and I'm like, I think we should probably add this and that and the next thing. But then, 2 weeks from now, I might be like, oh, we should add that and the next thing. So, I think that's good, right? I think that's how things should be, right? You should be constantly learning and trying new things and figuring out new things. And
maybe you guys come out with quarterly journals. That way you can.
Maybe we should do that.
Instead of a book. That way you can get it out quick and people can subscribe to it, and you can continue the process.
Right. That sounds like a much better idea, because, I think what we both learned, or what I learned at least from going through this process, is, it's you do all this work for what you are thinking at the moment, and then, you learn new drills, or you learn different ways. I think the concepts are still the same, or the overall structure of the book would still be the same, but there's little things you're like, I don't really use that drill too much anymore, because I don't like it, because I think you need to consider this and that and the next thing. And that's a difficult thing. And I know he's been working on a different book with Terry Rolls as well. I don't know what's happening with that one, or whether it's close to being ready or not, but I think they're probably running into the same things, where you're constantly learning new things, and you're constantly adapting and trying to do things better. I think, because that book, we came back to it. Bernie Najar is another author on that book, and he and I were looking through it, and we read through it, and we're like, that's kind of what we were thinking, 2 years ago, but now it's a little different. And then you make those adjustments, and then a year later, you're like, we should have done this. It's difficult. It's difficult to publish books that way, and I'm sure that's true of anyone who's ever published a book. You're constantly learning and trying to do better things. So, but that's just my, it's hard for me to So I don't know if it'll ever come out because now we're down the road so far now that. But I think you're right. Maybe some form of a journal or some form of and that's what academia is based on, journals that publish once a quarter or once a month or whatever, and yeah, that kind of thing I think would be probably more useful.
What I wanted to get to, so he had some of his ideas established, and as you mentioned, they're always evolving and changing.
Yeah.
What have you helped him with through your expertise in the swing catalyst system, and what you know that has helped Mike in his teaching and all the people that go to him, and he teaches seminars to other coaches and so on. So it's obviously spreading through the golf instructional world. What was the contribution from you, or how do you guys, I mean, you guys obviously gel very well.
Yeah, I think what I tried to do was kind of rein him in a little bit because I believe when I first met him, I mean, he started telling me about all the tests he did to assess a human, and there were, I don't remember how many of them there were, but there was a ton of them. He had all these different tests, and there was like 4 to 5 levels or 3 or 4 or 5 levels of every single test. And my scientific brain was like, oh my God, there's no way we're ever going to be able to quantify all this because the permutations and combinations of all of those things were like, and I remember one time I was like, Mike, what are the because obviously we're talking about using the ground better because that's what I was doing with the swing catalyst. And I was like, what are like the 3 or 4 tests, 4 or 5, whatever tests that best determine how you optimally use the ground? He's like, oh, well, it's this. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's get rid of the other ones. Let's just focus on these ones. And I would say, if you had to determine the one most important test to determine how you would most optimally use the ground, I would say it'd have to be the post test. And so that's the one I've kind of really focused on. So, and that's the problem, me being a scientist and Mike being a practitioner needs to consider a million things to solve the problem of the one human that's standing in front of them. But if I'm designing a study, I have to control for every other factor other than the one we're measuring. So I have to really focus down. And that's something that, I forget who it was. I believe it, what was his name? One of the big athletic trainers in the U.S. talked about research in one of his talks that I was at, because I used to do a lot of work in like physical therapy and strength and conditioning stuff. And he said, you know what an expert is? Somebody who learns more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. And I was like, oh, shoot, that's me. So it's always that push and pull from, the practitioners who have to consider a million different things or the teachers versus the scientists who have to really focus on one little thing. I think we've kind of done a good job of kind of meeting in the middle somewhere where we're still getting enough information that Mike can make really good decisions, but we're still making it simple enough that, doing research in science is relatively or a little bit more simple. And that's where I've really focused on his post tests. And I think his post tests are highly correlated with what your dominant leg is. So if you're a left post, you're probably a left leg dominant person. If you're a right post, you're probably a very right leg dominant person. And if you're a center post, I would say your left and right are probably very even. And there's not one that's really more dominant than the other. And that's going to really help you understand how to use the ground most optimally for you.
That is interesting because when I was a kid in high school, I would rotate between, and that was in the late 80s. So that was, the Jimmy Ballard was a big name back then and very popular teacher. Yeah. So I would rotate between, and as you watch Curtis Strange and Hal Sutton and Rocco Mediate, I would copy them and I would shift off the ball. And then I'd probably overcooked it and got to a point where I'd be sliding too much and I'd hit these blocks right, or every once in a while smothered hook. And, you need to rotate more. So then I'd start rotating and then I'd go gravitate too far probably towards a stack and tilt. And it was a constant back and forth between the two.
Yeah, and I think that's true. That's why, all those guys out on tour have their coaches out there every week with them, because that is a natural thing to happen. I remember when Mike originally told me that I was a glider, I was like getting so far behind it and gliding off the planet, and I started hitting these big snap hooks, which I hated. I was like, Mike, this is crap. I don't know what you're talking about. And he looked at me, he's like, dude, one aspirin's good. You don't take the whole bottle.
That's interesting because, I have to tell a lot of people, especially the students I have who are still working, so they're still very highly driven, successful types. I warn them ahead of time because they'll start to hit the ball a lot better by the end of the lesson, usually, hopefully. Mm-hmm. But I'll say, look, the 10% difference of feel that you have right now, you can go incrementally further, but after, depending on how much they play, let's say a week, you don't need to have that same feel, because you'll go from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40, and pretty soon your swing has gone the opposite direction, and you're not going to hit it
100%.
very good. So watch the addiction to the feel that you have, and we can curtail it. Send me a text message, video, whatever you need to, just so
Yeah.
we can make sure that you don't shift from one pole to the other.
Right. And I think that's what the technology can be really good for, because, one thing I found with our pressure plate is the amount of pressure you get into your trail side maximally during the backswing is highly dependent on what your post style is. So the most we've ever measured is 100%. Like literally, JB Holmes' front foot is not even touching the ground when he gets to the top of the backswing. I mean, it's on the ground, but he's not pushing through it at all. He's the most right pressure shift off the ball we've measured, and Mike would say he's one of the most right post players or trail post players that he's seen.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have people like, I think, what's his name? Charlie Wee. We have him on the plate. I don't know if he's still playing or not, but he was one of the people who was kind of the poster child for stack and tilt, right?
Yeah, he's one of the originals.
And he stuck with it and, played some good golf. So I think he won some on tour with it. And so, and he's, I think, 50% into his trail side maximally. So he doesn't get any pressure over to the trail side. He kind of stays stacked on the left. And then in between that, we have Justin Rose, which is about 80. And it's interesting how people become, very calibrated around their own swing. So I'll do a lesson or a session with somebody on the plate where they'll be getting 90% into their trail side, which is very far towards a right dominant swinger. And then I'll test them, and they should be more towards a center dominant. So I'm like, I want to decrease the pressure into your trail side about 10%. So I want you to go from 90 to about 80. And when I get them to do that field, they're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm stacked on my left leg when I do that. And I'm like, you're not. You're a very centered pressured, but your brain is calibrated around being way right. So that feels stacked. And then you get them hitting it well around 80, and then they call you and they're like, I'm in it terrible now. What's going on? And you get them back on the plate, and now they've gone to like 60, right? So now they are actually
right.
swinging. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people assume that if a little is good, more is better. And it's not always the case, right? There's an optimal for you, and it's always kind of an inverted U hypothesis, right? You can have too much, you can have too little, and you have just right. So John Dunnigan likes to call it, he likes to do the Goldilocks drill. So too much, too little, and just right. And
mm-hmm.
that's a good drill to do for you. So if you know what your optimal is in a lesson, you figure out what your optimal is when you go to the range after your lesson. Try to do too much of it and see what the ball does, and try to do less of it and see what the ball does, and then try to do your optimal amount and see what the ball does. And then I think what that does, it gives you strategies to deal with things when they go wacky on the course.
Yes, it sets the
right?
parameters. So you have two like when you go bowling for little kids, they put the gutter rails on.
The bumpers, yeah,
yes,
totally,
bumpers.
yeah. It puts the bumpers, so you know what each side. And to me, I think golf. When you hit a bad shot in golf, you don't know why it was bad. So that was like me when I was a kid, right? When I was hitting those snap hooks that were coming back at me, it becomes a hopeless situation, and you're like, "This is terrible. I hate this game because I don't know why it's doing what it's doing, and I can't stop it." Whereas if you start to do more of these Goldilocks drills, and if you get too far into your trail side, you start hitting these big smother hooks, and if you get too far in your lead side, you start hitting cuts. Then if the ball starts doing a crazy thing on the course, you're like, okay, I have a strategy to deal with that because
mm-hmm.
I've done my Goldilocks drills. And to me, actually doing things on purpose poorly on the range or not optimal for you is a good learning strategy. And that's something I've learned a ton about from my buddy Will Wu, who is a motor learning specialist. And I think that's kind of the next level of science, or the next scientific endeavor that I think golf teachers need to start learning a lot more about. I think it was when Chris Como got the job working with Tiger where everybody became super interested in biomechanics, and they created a market for people like me to teach biomechanics to golf instructors. But and before that, they didn't really know what they didn't know, right? They didn't know that there were all these cool things about biomechanics that we don't really understand. And I think the next level, or the next thing, I think, will be this motor learning science. So motor learning science studies how you teach people motor tasks, or how people learn motor tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And golf teachers and golfers butcher good motor learning principles all the time. We've all done it, right? I've gone to the driving range with a 7-iron and hit 300 balls trying to do the same thing over and over again. That's the absolute worst way to learn something, because your brain doesn't get any context. It doesn't know what too much is. It doesn't know what too little is. Because if your brain knows where the top end of the spectrum, the lower end of the spectrum is, finding the middle becomes way easier. But if you just do the same thing over and over again, it doesn't know the difference. And so it makes it very hard to put it in play, on the first tee, or on the, 17th green fairway the next day when the ball's above your feet and there's a right to left wind and all these things that come into playing golf. So yeah, I mean that would be an interesting person to have on your podcast if you want to at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always looking for interesting
people. And he
people.
and John Dunnigan have created a training kind of an educational program based around motor learning science, and I think they've had about 100 golf teachers go through it. And my girlfriend's a golf teacher in Connecticut, and she's gone through it, and she said it's been one of the most kind of revolutionary things for her as a golf instructor it's helped her help her students and
what was the fellow's name?
A lot more. It's Dr. Will Woof. He's at Long Beach State University. Works with John Dunnigan on something called the Skilled Coaching Alliance. And I know they've had kind of an all-star team of coaches go through their training program. So I know Mark Blackburn's gone through it, who was the PGA Coach of the Year. I know Jason Bale's gone through it. He's the Director of Instruction at Jupiter Hills. Who else went through it? Kevin Sprecher and Debbie Doniger have gone through it. They're both directors of instruction at really nice places in the New York area. I mean, to me, I think some of the best teachers in the world are the people who are always constantly trying to learn and trying to do better. And the fact that some of these really high level teachers are taking this tells me that it's really good stuff.
Oh, especially in today's world where things change so fast. And you alluded to that as you and Mike dived into this and deeper, what you're learning is changing so quickly you can't even get your book out in time.
I know, yeah, it's and so I think this science has really helped me a ton understand how to create better drills to help people use the ground better, how to get it to stick, because I've done it before. I've had lessons where you're killing it on the range and you're hitting it perfect with this teacher there, and then the next day it's just gone. You're like, I don't know what happened. I can't do anything. And every golfer and every golf teacher's had that before, right? Where you have a really good session and you're hitting it really well, and the next day you're like, I don't know where it went. Like, it's gone. I just have no idea. And to me, that means you imitated very well. You didn't learn anything. Will has a great analogy. He talks about cooking. So, I mean, I can't cook. I can barbecue, but I don't cook very well. And so you could put the very best, Michelin 5-star ingredients in front of me, and I'd still screw up whatever recipe I was trying to make because I can't cook. And so that's kind of the thing. I think when you go to get to a golf lesson, and if the golf teacher gives you good information, you start hitting it well, those are your ingredients. And if he's there with you, or he or she are there with you, and you're hitting it really well, you're just imitating. But the next day, you still have the ingredients because you remember what he told you or he or she told you, but you can't cook it yet by yourself. So motor learning is really the strategies where you learn how to cook. You learn the instructions of how to put this together, whip it up this way. And, there's a lot to cooking besides having good ingredients, and there's a lot more to golf instruction besides having a good idea of what you're doing. Human beings need to learn stuff, right? And how we learn a motor task is way different from how we learn a cognitive task.
What would be an example?
Nobody would ever give you a math problem. So if I went to a little kid and said, what's 2 + 2? And they say 87, I wouldn't be like, yes, perfect, that's great. Whereas, if I'm I remember one of the first sessions I had with Will Woo on the range, I was working on some things to try to prevent a snap hook. And he gave me one ball, and he says, hook this one off the planet. I was like, wait, like, don't you understand that I'm trying to prevent that? He's like, yeah, I know, I get it. Hook this one off the planet. And then slice this one off the planet, right? So, I mean, you do it wrong on purpose in a motor task because that helps you learn how to do it right. Whereas you would never give a kid a math problem and say, just do it, like, butcher this completely. And I mean, I think you need to get Will on here because he probably could explain this a lot better than I can. But I think I've really learned the value of this and in my own little way, implementing it in my own game and my own practice and in the work that I do with certain players as well. I know we did some work. I work a lot with Tony Ruggiero, and he works with Lucas Glover. And Lucas hates to see the ball cut. I remember working with him once, and he hit this shot that started about, 5 feet left of the target and cut to about a foot, and he was pissed off. If he hits one that starts, 20 feet right of the target and draws back to 10 feet, he's way happier. And that's just, who knows where that's come from, right? He's just, his window and his eye likes to see a draw. And so I remember asking him, like, here, cut this one. He's like, what are you talking about? I hate that. I'm like, yeah, but you need to know what it feels like to cut it and what you need to do to cut it so you know how to stop it. If it starts cutting on the golf course and you're hitting shots that you don't like, or you're hitting pulls on the golf course, which you just hate, And so we did some Goldilocks technique, which is like too much, too little, just right. And I think Tony still uses that now with him because I think it gives you that context to make you know what it feels like to do it wrong.
That's kind of interesting because not even knowing that, I when I get in the so when a student, let's say we get a fair amount of people from tourists from the up north, and it's been cold, and they haven't been able to play, and rotation, cutting off of their rotation because they're not in golf shape. Even if they hit in their garage or they did yoga all winter, they don't. Their timing's a little disrupted, and getting them to turn. And if we're struggling, I'll just say, okay, I want you to turn to the extreme that you can turn.
Yeah.
And usually they'll hit it really good, or they'll come very close. And I'll say, okay, now we know where you were and we know what you just did. So let's work from both ends and find where you need to be.
Sure. No, that is, and I think, people inherently, do that. I mean, it's a good learning strategy for anything, right? So if I want to throw a ball a certain distance, throw it way too far and then throw it way too short and then try to find the middle in between those. I mean, those types of games that you can play with yourself on the range. Like literally now when I go to the range, I don't just hit stock shots all the time. I'm like, okay, let's hook this one. Let's hit this one low. Let's hit this one high. Let's fade this one.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of variability in your practice can make the transfer to actual play, or actually hitting these shots when it counts, and whether it counts to you just playing with your buddies, or whether it counts to you playing at a tournament, or whether it counts to you playing in the Masters. I think it's the same because you build up stress in your own head, right? It doesn't matter if it's $5 playing your buddy or whether it's playing for 1.2 million on the Masters. Stress comes down to what you perceive in your head. So.
That's interesting because I had Ian Highfield. I don't know if you're familiar with Ian.
No.
He's been on the Golf Channel, and he worked at the International Junior Academy here for a while, and he spoke at Coach Camp, and my brother worked with him for a while, and he is big on practicing. He's written a couple books on it. It talks a lot about variable practice, and for example, hitting basically playing a hole for each shot. So you would be at the driving range and you would hit, let's say, your 7-iron and had imaginary green, or even if you have the greens, and then, okay, if you miss the target, now let's go over to the chipping green, and where'd you miss it? And now let's hit that shot. And then now let's go to the putting green, and if you hit it on the chipping green to 5 feet, let's go to 5 feet, same type putt, and let's see you make it. And he even goes so far as changing the variability. He changes the scores, and there's 3 things that he works with. So you have to hit a certain test score within a certain time frame in this gauntlet, so to speak, to mentally prepare people or his students for tournament golf. So I had him on it, and I've been working with Scott Fawcett from Decade, because I know that they've gone back and forth a little bit. Scott's big on block practice, or at least is a little more pro, and Ian's obviously bigger on variable practice, and Adam Long is going to come on, I think, as soon as we can work out a schedule with him. And it's a fascinating thing because I'm a proponent of both, right? If you're learning something new, you can work on something. You don't want to hit all 300 balls the same, but you can sit there for a decent amount of time till the brain's not processing. But as you progress closer to an event or start of a tour season or a college, what have you, it's got to transition in a variable, because that's what you got to train your brain as much as your body. So I find that so fascinating.
Totally, and that's what Will talks about. I mean, his good analogy, I hope I don't butcher it, but is he always asks people, if people say, is block practice better than random practice, or is random practice better than block practice? He would say, do you take a freezing cold shower, or do you take a boiling hot shower? Which one do you take? Neither, right? You're in the middle somewhere. And so it's dealing in the middle somewhere where, some people might have to shift a little bit towards blocked for whatever goal they're assuming, and some people might have to shift a little towards random. But it'd be stupid to be completely, utterly random all the time and completely, utterly blocked all the time. So, and I think it's the same for anything, right? There's always going to be that optimal point in the middle where going way too far towards one end or way too far towards the other end is not going to be optimal for you. So, I think that's he's got some really good stuff, and I highly recommend you guys. I'm sure your users or readers or listeners, I guess you'd call it, would be very would learn some stuff from him for sure, because I've learned a ton from him.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I got to reach out to him. Let's talk a little bit about what exactly your things that you work with, force plates and pressure traces. That's what you're known for, so to speak, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
if that's a fair way to
Yep.
say it.
Yep.
Let's just jump into that, and can you let's start with the explanation of the difference between force plates and pressure tracing.
Okay.
For some who aren't maybe have access to something like that, but they've seen it on TV or they've
Right.
watched or heard you speak somewhere or something along those lines.
Yeah. So a pressure plate, we have a pressure plate. We call it our balance plate for swing catalyst, and the competitor or a similar product would be a body track mat. And pressure is only perpendicular to the surface in which you're standing on. So it's only a vertical force straight down on top of it. And a pressure plate or mat has a whole bunch of mini little sensors inside that measure how much, because pressure is force divided by area. So you have to have an idea of the area over which the force is acting to have an idea about pressure. And I think, Body Track did a really good job when it came out of talking about, the center of pressure trace and all those types of things. And there's a lot of good information you can glean from center of pressure traces, but you have to realize it's all based on only the perpendicular forces on top of the mat that it's measuring.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of other forces that a golfer has to produce to swing a golf club. And if you look at that guy swinging on the ice, you notice that there's a lot of forward and backward shear forces, right? So I have to push my feet forward and backwards into the ground to create rotation. And pressure mat doesn't tell you anything about that. You can't even guess at it because, when I first started working with Swing Catalyst, and Swing Catalyst has a patent on using pressure and force together. So our pressure plate is mounted on top of the force plate, so we get all the force information plus the pressure information together. And I think it was Jeff Smith out of Las Vegas, the Radar Golf Pro, that asked me one time, I think it was at a coach camp, because we were talking about center of pressure traces. And some people have very linear center of pressure traces, and other people have kind of curvy looking ones. I remember I was teaching this stuff to Cameron McCormick, and the curvy kind of looking, I think some people call it like a fishhook trace. He called it the Sydney Bridge because it looks like the bridge or the Harbor Bridge in Sydney. And I remember Jeff Smith asking me, do you think the people with the curvy center of pressure traces are more rotational and the people with the linear center of pressure traces are more horizontal or more glidey, as Mike Adams would call it? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I need to look into that. And it's not the case. I've looked into it now, and you can be very horizontal in terms of your force pattern, but having the center of pressure trace look kind of curvy, and you can, and the opposite. So I think, center of pressure traces and center and pressure can tell you a lot. I think to me, what I look at a ton with our pressure is like where the hot spots are under your foot. Because with a force plate, you can't see that, right? With the force plate, it just gives you one little dot, which is your center of pressure, but it doesn't give you the heat map of where the pressures are under your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And where I look at that a lot is at setup. It's amazing to me how many people set up in an unbalanced position. So they're either way on their toes or way on their heels, or way on the outside of their feet, or way on their right foot or way on their left foot. We were doing a lesson out. I went to visit my good friend John Dunnigan in Philadelphia last year, and he had a kid who tons of speed, like really athletic kid, but he had the hosel rockets. He would be hitting the hosel one out of every 3 or 4, and it would be ruining his round. And what we found out was he was when we got him on the pressure plate, he was setting up entirely on his heels. And if you looked at the video, you couldn't really tell, right? His toes were on the ground, but there was just no pressure underneath there. And what you find is if I'm all set up on my heels when I swing, I can't go into my heels anymore. So he was like diving towards his toes as he swung, which brought the hosel closer to the ball and then created that hosel rocket. And so we did a cool drill, which is something I kind of learned from Will Wu. And it's something I think a lot of, golfers could benefit from. We had him set up to the golf ball in what he thought was a balanced setup. Then I said, go all the way onto your toes where you might fall over. Now go all the way onto your heels where you might fall over. Now find like halfway in between those two. And then once he did that, he found where a kind of a balanced setup was because his brain then learned where the limits were, because he thought he was balanced on his heel, but until he went all the way onto his toes and then all the way onto his heels, he was like, oh yeah, I wasn't balanced. That is more balanced when I get in between those two. And that's something that was all based upon the pressure plate, understanding that. Whereas if we were on a force plate, which just gives you a little dot for the center of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
You don't know if that's the toe or the heel or whatever, unless you have a 3D motion capture system that is synced to it. So that's the difference. I mean, pressure plates are, they give you a ton of really good information, but they can't measure anything about the shearing forces. So forward and backward shearing, side to side shearing forces, or the twisting forces, or the torques. that are all needed in the golf swing. So, I would say a pressure plate helps you look under the hood a little bit. It would be like an X-ray. So an X-ray will show you your bony structure, but it doesn't show you what the ligaments are doing or whether there's a tear in your meniscus or anything like that. But it does help you look. I mean, obviously, we've been using X-rays clinically for a really long time because it gives us information we can't see with our eye just looking at the human. But then now we've invented MRI machines that can go in and see what your meniscus looks like and so that would be the force plate. It really digs under the hood and tells you everything to do with what your feet are doing to the ground. So it gives you information about those side-to-side shearing forces, the forward and backward shearing forces, and about those twisting forces or those torques, which gives us more information about, or gives us a lot more information about how that golfer is interacting with the ground. Because I think in the past, because all we had was a body track or a pressure mat or a pressure plate, we were trying to make too many assumptions from the pressure plate that we really couldn't make. And I think that's why, some people were like, oh, this pressure stuff, I'm not really sure about it. Well, if you understand what it gives you and what its limitations are, I think it can still be super valuable. And I think we've learned that now by combining pressure and force together.
And that gets back into, just to reiterate, that there's the three ways people move: linearly, rotational, and vertical, right? So, yep. And it measures all three of those things.
It measures all three of those things. And I think, to me, the simplicity of it is literally, I think one of our Swedish ambassadors, Eric Blomqvist, I was at his facility several years ago, and he was giving a little talk, and he put an amplifier for a guitar up on the screen. And, an amplifier has treble, bass, and I forget what the third thing's called. But and so if I'm playing the guitar or if I'm singing, right, it has to be at a certain level for me to sound good. And then if anyone's ever been to a concert where, there's multiple bands, what happens when one band leaves and the next band comes on? The roadies come on and they retune everything, right? Because you have to turn those knobs to different. These people were like, if I just crank up the horizontal, the rotation, and the vertical, everybody will hit it great, right? If I just max out all three. And that's not the case, because that would be easy. You wouldn't need those roadie people if that was the case, right? Everybody would just crank up all three of them, and everybody would sound great. Is in using a ground reactive force plate is tuning all those forces to the individual in front of you. And I think that you can do it, kind of by trial and error. So you can just say, hey, let's crank up the horizontal and see what happens. And then say, okay, well, that's bad. I don't like that. Let's crank up the torque and see what happens. And I think you can do it by trial and error, and it just takes a little longer that way. Or I think using Mike Adams' system is where you can really know without, you have a better guess to start with. So once you do your little test with Mike Adams, if he tells you you're a front post player and you're an on-top grip, that tells you, okay, I need a lot of vertical force. I probably want to turn down my horizontal force. If I have too much horizontal force, that's not good for a left post on-top player. And so it gives you a good starting point to say, hey, and then you measure yourself, and if you have a ton of horizontal force, then what Mike Adams would say, you got a lot of potential. That's what he always says to people. So you know what potential means? You haven't done shit yet. And he has all those little jokes. But yeah, I think that's what the system is that we now use the force plate for, and I can teach pretty much any golf instructor some tools. So I can teach you some tools to turn up horizontal force and to turn down horizontal force, and turn up torque and turn down torque, and turn up vertical and turn down vertical. And if you have all those tools in your toolbox, then you can manipulate those forces and optimize them for each person. And that's really what teaching with the force plate is doing. And it's interesting to me that one tool that I have to let's say, I'll give you a tool that's supposed to crank up your horizontal force, and then I give you that drill, and then you hit on the plate, and all of a sudden your vertical goes up, and I was like, ooh, I didn't mean to do that. And so that's where, and sometimes that might be that might be a good thing. You don't know. And so that's why measuring it is important, because you don't really know. Every tool could have a desired impact, but given in the brain and in the nervous system of another individual could cause something completely different to happen. And so measuring those things can become really important. And then I think what's really good with the force plate, a lot of people use it, is to, once you're hitting it really well, to archive that.
Yeah, to set your baseline, to know what you need to go to.
Your baseline, yeah. And I talk to a lot of golf teachers about this. I'm like, how many people have ever had, in a room full of golf teachers, I'll say, how many people have ever had somebody come see them and say, Coach, I'm hitting it great today. That's why I came to see you. Like, never happens, right? Like, and that's where you should, if you have the force plate technology and you have people that you work with all the time, you should communicate to them, hey, if you're hitting it really well at a particular time, come see me. Like, I'll just throw you on the plate, I'll measure it, and then we have it archived for later on. Because I've had that happen in the past where some people have come to see me and said, I don't know what's going on, I'm hitting it terrible right now. And I look at the two swings side by side, and I'm like, oh, well, you were getting 80% into your trail side, and now you're only 65. So we just got to get a little more pressure in the trail side, introduce a little more glide or whatever it is, or rotation, and then you can get them back a lot quicker. And I think that's something that, doing all the work that I've done on the plate myself, I can now feel like on the golf course what it feels like when I get too much pressure into my trail side or not enough pressure into my trail side. And I know what the ball does when I do that, or I know what the ball does when I'm creating too much horizontal and too much glide. I know what the ball does when I'm creating too much vertical, or my vertical is mistimed. And so once the ball starts doing those things, I'm like, okay, I have a strategy now. And I think that's what makes it, golf can be so frustrating, because when the ball's doing something you have no idea why, that's why people get super frustrated and throw clubs and, and quit. But if you have a strategy, if you hit a shot and it does a bad thing, you're like, oh, that's cool, no big deal, I know why I did that, I can fix that. Then the game becomes a lot less frustrating and a lot more fun.
And it's important to note that not everyone's going to max out all forces, right?
No,
There's certain people for certain
100%. Yeah. The only type of golfer I think that has to max out all forces are the long drive guys, long drive people. I've had some women long drive players as well who are. So if your goal is to just hit it as far as possible and get one out of how many shots they get? 8, I think. 1 out of 8 shots in the grid, then yeah, I think you have to max out all of those forces. But if your goal is to hit it somewhere where you can find it and make birdies, and then no, your goal is not to max out all the forces. So I think long drive is kind of a Darwinian event. If you are able to max out all the forces, it's kind of a survival of the fittest, right? You can go on and be a long drive person. If you're not able to do that, then let's just optimize them for you. Because I know we've probably measured hundreds of PGA Tour players, and there's only a handful of them that kind of get all of their forces at or above the tour average. It would be Justin Rose, Tommy Fleetwood, I believe Kevin Tway, one of EJ Sister's clients had that. I can't remember. There's only a few others that have done it. So, but you measure other people like Jason Day, who's won a lot and played really well. If he gets too much horizontal, his swing isn't very good. And so with him, you got to kind of turn that down. With Lucas Glover, if he gets too much rotational, it's probably not great, because that will generally cause the ball to start left and the path to start moving more and more left. And if he has a leftward path, that introduces the pulls and the cuts that he hates. And so we got to get him moving a little more horizontal. And so these are the things that you have to know, what's good for your player, and you have to optimize those. And I think the force plate takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, and it makes it happen a lot quicker. And I think a force plate combined with, Mike Adams' system, or understanding what somebody's dominant leg is and understanding what their posting style is, and all of those things can really help us make a lot more educated decisions. And hopefully we're going to be able to add to our knowledge base to make better decisions, even more than that, once we understand more about the structure of the human. Because maybe if you have an Eastern European hip, you might be more of a Justin Thomas jumper. And if you have more of a Scottish hip, you might be more of a rotator. Who knows? But then you have to enter in the fact of what they've done their whole life, because I have Scottish roots, so I would argue that I probably have a Scottish hip, but I played hockey my whole life. So maybe so there's all these things you have to enter in, and that's the fun part to me, is solving that puzzle of the person standing in front of you. It would be super easy if everybody was the same. Like, golf instruction would be no fun, because you would just give the same lesson over and over again, and it would be boring. And I think that's why golf is so fun, is it's you trying to solve, as a golf teacher, you're trying to solve that person standing in front of you and what they need to hit it better. And then as a golfer, you're trying to solve your own messiness. And your own messiness changes all the time. If you're playing basketball and you roll your ankle, that changes how you move. You're going to limp for a while, and then you're going to have to alter your golf swing to make up for that newly developed messiness. And so, or if you go to the gym for a while and do a lot of work in the gym, that's going to change how you move, which might alter how you have to swing the golf club. So it's a constant battle out there, and humans are different. We change all the time based on our emotional state, based on what we've done physically, based on any injuries we might have had, or any pain, or how we slept the night before. Or there's so many factors that enter into it, and I think that's why there are those swing coaches out there every week with the players, because every week they're trying to optimize what that body can do on that particular week, and making those little tweaks every week to try to get them back to where they need to be. And it's interesting to me. I remember asking Cameron McCormick, like on a week-to-week basis with your players, how much of what you do is like physical, mechanical, and how much of you do is just kind of like getting that player in a better place to
to play better. And he's like probably like 5% and 95%.
Wow.
I mean, these guys are so good that it's mainly just you know, getting them in the right mental state to let their bodies do what it's been trained to do, because there are so many things that happen to those guys that you know, that have to be dealt with on a week-to-week basis. So it's super interesting to me, and it's the same thing for, you know, average Joe who just wants to play well with his buddies. There's no difference. It's still, you're a human. You have things that go on in your lives that can affect you, and how to optimize that to play the best you can, have the most fun out there is the challenge. And you know, working out that physical and mental messiness is, you know, if you have a coach can help you along with that. If you don't have a coach, then it's just you working with yourself. And I think the technology can really help with that. You know, I've got on the plate when I'm hitting it crappy, and all of a sudden, no, I'm not getting as far into my trail side because, you know, whatever feel I've overdone, and okay, that makes sense to me. And I think that's really your goal in golf, is to give people hope, right? If you hit it poorly and you know why it went where it did and why it did what it did, then you have hope because you can then fix it. It's when you don't have hope, when you're hitting it poorly and you don't know why, that the game gets super frustrating. And in the end, it's physics. The reason the ball went the way where it did is because of physics, because your club was doing this and the face was doing that and the spin was this, and then so it can be figured out. There are ways to make it do something different, but that's the thing with the human is, we're not robots. And so the way that I make it do something different is way different from the way that you would make it do something different. So we could have the same ball flight and the fix could be way different for me than it could be for you. And I think with the technology, we can get closer to that with every person.
How do wrist conditions affect the ground reaction forces of the lateral, horizontal, vertical? So like a flat versus a bowed versus a cup.
Yeah, I mean, what we've done, I think it was, I don't remember what year it was, a long time ago. I did a study with Terry Rolls, actually, where he was super interested in face alignments, basically. So what we did is we set up people, and it's interesting, we did this in his backyard in Phoenix, where you know, in Phoenix the houses are all really close together. So and we were collecting all this data into a net in Phoenix, and if you missed the net, you would hit it into Terry's neighbor's living room or whatever. So there was a lot of incentive for you to hit the net. So basically what we did is we put you in a position and we shut the face. I think it was like 30 degrees, something like that. So the face is literally pointing at your left foot, and you had to grip it normally from there, and your instructions were hit the ball straight. And then we did the opposite. We put the club in your hand and we twisted it 30 degrees open, and you had to grip it normally and said, hit the ball straight. And so within one or two shots, everybody would figure out how to close the face and what they did, or how to get the face neutral. And they altered how they use the ground. They altered their body mechanics to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, I always talk about how Newton's laws say that forces come before motion. So the ground reaction forces come before the motions that you see. But everybody's reacting to where that face is in space. So if I bow my left wrist a little more, I generally will shut the face, which means I have to react a little more. So, and generally I can, if I want to introduce a little more rotation into my swing, then that will help me do it. Is getting a little more of that bowed left wrist. And so, but that's just me. Like, that's how I react to that condition. Because in my brain, when I bow my left wrist, it helps me rotate a little better, because I know that if I glide a lot with that bowed left wrist, I'm going to hook the crap out of it. And then the opposite, I think in my swing, I generally developed a very cupped left wrist. And I think that was my body figuring out how to not hook it off the planet when I was a little kid, right? I just tried to open the face as much as I could. But that was creating a lot of kind of glancing blows and costing me a lot of speed. And so, everything in the human body is connected to everything else. So if I put you in a different wrist position, your body will adapt and do something different on the ground, but everybody will do something slightly different, because everybody's brains are different. And that's something that I've used, because I know that if I shut the face a lot, that helps me move a little better in a way that doesn't hook it. Because with the face shut, if I keep doing what I did before, which is my slightly rightward path, I hook it off the planet, and I hate that. So my body will adapt if I put myself in a closed face position to move in a way that it doesn't do that. So, yeah, and these are all the things that you figure out with, because it's all connected. You figure out all these things with trial and error with humans, right? And so this would be like a good way to try to figure all these things out is to just do Goldilocks drills with yourself. So one of the things I like about Mike's system is the right hand grip can really help control the face. So he calls it an under right hand grip, would be really strong right hand. Side under would be a little less strong. Side on is kind of a neutral right hand grip. Then we got side cover and cover, which would be weaker left hand grips. And he has a little test to determine what's optimal for you. And sometimes when people do the test and I look at it, I'm like, I'm not really sure. Like, if what you are, because sometimes people just do things because they think they should do it. They're not doing it because that's what's natural for them, and so it's hard to get that. So what I'll do is have them hit in your normal grip. Okay, now make it a little stronger and hit another one. Now make it a little weaker and hit another one. Like, which one of those do you like the best? And they're like, oh, I kind of, when I hit it with a really weak grip, it's terrible. When I hit it with a little stronger, it's a little better. So you can kind of Goldilocks it for yourself. And so I think that's a good strategy for people that maybe don't have the technology and can't really figure out for themselves how the wrist conditions affect the ground. And it's different for everyone. Putting a bowed left wrist on me gets me a little more rotational, but on somebody else, it could do something completely different because the way every body reacts to different stimuli is going to be different because we all have different experiences. We all have different neural pathways that we've laid down over all of our lives. We all have different anatomy. We all have different structure. And so all of those things are going to be different. So that's why the technology is there, because we wouldn't need it if X always caused Y, which, in some engineering fields, if I'm dealing with a piece of metal and I do X to it, then 99.9% of the time Y is going to happen. But with a human, that doesn't happen because we've got so much messiness.
Science and the applied science.
Totally. Right. And that's what makes it fun. And if that excites you, if solving those puzzles of human beings excite you, then golf might be for you and golf instruction might be for you. But if you want more, this, then this, then this, then maybe it's not for you because there are so many things that can go wrong. And if it's exciting to try to solve that puzzle, to me, if I have a really poor round of golf, obviously, you're not going to be happy about it, but I see that as a challenge to go home and figure out what happened. Like, why did it do that? What was happening in my body or my brain in that day that caused that to happen, and how can I make it not happen again? And so that's a little puzzle for me to solve. And the same thing when I'm helping somebody on the plate. I've worked with a lot of people on the plate. Recently, right before the event at Riviera, I got the opportunity to work with Vaughn Taylor on the force plate, and I don't think he's made a cut ever since. He's played terrible, and I don't know. There's so many things, right, that could affect how he played on the plate, but to me, I didn't help him as well as I should have. And so, there's two things I can do. I can go say, screw him, he doesn't know what he's doing, or I can be like, I got to get better. There's something that I didn't get across to him, or something we didn't find on the plate, or some way we didn't help him. And to me, that's the challenge: is to get better every day and try to figure out how you can help everyone.
When, as far as the force plates, when do most good players start the downward push in the downswing, and when do they typically start their vertical?
The peak vertical force has to happen a lot earlier than you'd think, and I would say with the peak or the downward movement, which I call the preload for the vertical. Everybody watches Rory, who goes down in his transition, right? As the club's at the top, he kind of lowers down in transition. That's an extremely responsive nervous system that allows that to happen, because he has to go down and then produce that vertical force in a very short period of time. And Rory is an incredible athlete to make that happen in time. And so everybody's nervous system works differently. And I've worked a lot with Ben Shear up in the New York area, and he has a system where he puts people in little groups based on their nervous system. He calls it a resistor or a releaser. So a resistor is somebody who has a very reactive nervous system. This would be like a Tony Finau, right? A very short, compact, quick, ballistic swing. And then a releaser would be somebody like Phil Mickelson, right? So Tony Finau and Phil Mickelson probably produce pretty similar club head speeds, but they do it way different, right? Phil has to rev that engine for a long time, right? He gets a lot of time to create speed, whereas Tony does it over a very short period of time. And why is that possible? Because those are two very different nervous systems. And so what we look at is the timing of the peak vertical. And the latest your peak vertical should happen in golf is club parallel on the way down. So that's P6, I believe.
Yes.
And because in order for the vertical force to kind of reach the club and create because we're measuring the force between the feet and the ground, and that force has to get through your body into the club, which takes some time.
Right.
And so, yeah, we can't have it happening at impact. And I would say there's kind of, if I put 100 random amateur golfers on the plate and we had people with mistimed verticals, I would say 90% of them would have verticals being too late. So I think too often people are just trying to stay in their posture and their verticals happen way too late. The only early verticals I've ever seen, which would mean happening kind of right before left arm parallel, which would be like P5, would be like really high speed swingers. I would say there's probably a handful of times in my life. Kevin Tway was one of them where we tried to delay his vertical a little bit, and he already swings at 125, 130-ish. I've had a couple other instances of really high speed swingers where we've tried to delay verticals, but on average, we're really trying to get verticals to happen sooner with most players. And this could be like we talked about, how you can overdo something. And TPI several years ago made early extension like the cardinal sin in golf, right? Everybody, I don't want to be an early extender.
Right.
That's like the worst thing you could possibly do.
I think it's still going on.
Yeah, and really a vertical force is an extension. If you look at Justin Thomas's swing, right? He's got a lot of extension in his swing, and when it happens, with him, it's probably well timed. But other people maybe are staying in their posture a little too long and trying to really avoid being an early extender, which is causing the verticals to be way too late and could be creating issues on the other end. So it's possible to be a late extender as well, and that's something that I'm finding a way more of than people producing way too early vertical forces. And so literally when you load the vertical is dependent on your nervous system. So some people, I'll tell them to kind of do some lowering in the backswing. If they need more vertical, getting them to lower in the backswing allows them to get that vertical to peak at the right time. Lowering in the downswing is a very athletic nervous system, which I would say 99.9% of us can't do. If I try to do a Rory swing where I lower in the downswing, I generally hit it about 1.5 feet fat. Because my nervous system is not as responsive as Rory's, and I can't turn it around and get it going up as quickly as he can. And then with even, less responsive nervous systems, you might even want to just preload the verticals at setup. So just get a little more squatty at setup, because that will get the verticals out of the system when we need them. So to me, I always look at when the verticals occur, and then if they're too late, we got to try to move them earlier. And the strategy to move vertical force earlier is to preload it earlier. And everybody sees Rory, what's the downswing? 0.2 of a second. So to preload your verticals and to get them out of the system in 0.2 of a second takes a very responsive, very athletic nervous system, which Rory has and not many else of us do. And so generally we want to preload those vertical forces much earlier for a lot of people, on average, I would say. But it is possible to have them too early as well. So just like anything, but it's only that I've only found it in really in young, very athletic, very high-speed swingers where we've had to move the vertical forces later in the swing. It's a very rare problem.
That's interesting because, as you said, the early extension, everyone's trying to get rid of that, so they're trying to not extend too soon. Or
and I think we might have taken the whole bottle of aspirin in that case, right? And so we need to back it off a bit and just take our one aspirin when it comes to that. So, and nothing bad with that. I think early extension is a problem. It's definitely a problem, and TPI has done a great job of educating people about it, but I think some people might have taken that a little bit too far. And that's just a hypothesis. I don't know if that's actually the case. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out why it is that we're seeing all these, I would say it's almost an epidemic of late vertical forces in amateur golfers that I'm trying to make those vertical forces happen earlier.
Well, yeah. I mean, you take a look at Jack Nicklaus. Technically, he would be an early extender, right? And kind of hard to argue with that one.
Totally. Yep. And so that's the thing. Anything that we've ever thought it to be if anyone's ever said X is like a terrible thing in golf or is the worst thing you can do in golf, I guarantee you can find a player who's made a ton of money and hit a lot of great shots doing that. And so I don't think there is anything that's detrimental to everyone. I'm sure we could find somebody that's doing it and hitting the ball well. And so, my job as a scientist is to figure out why. Why does that work in that person and not that person? And there's got to be an anatomical reason or a physiological reason, or there's got to be some reason that works. And that's kind of the road that I'm going down to try to figure those things out.
What, you've got a lot of work, obviously, that you're doing, even as in COVID. If anyone's listened so far and they think, well, he's, the school shut down, doesn't have a lot to do. You're I mean, between books and studies and continuing research of your own and everything else. It's a wonder that you have enough time in a day. But what do you have coming out either from yourself or through Swing Catalyst that you can talk about?
So Swing Catalyst, we've been working a lot recently on two big projects. So our current system for Swing Catalyst is a single plate force plate. So it means both feet are on the same plate. Mm-hmm. And so we now have, and we've had the two plates. I just got my system last week and I'm setting it up today later. So we have a 2-plate system. So now there's going to be 1 plate for each separate foot. So that's going to be some work for me to start to figure out what those numbers mean and how to use those in my system. Luckily, the 2-plate system, you can mathematically combine the 2 plates to give the same information that you get off the single plate. So I can still use it the way I've used my previous system. But now we're going to have to dig into these individual forces coming off each foot, which will help us. I think there will be some really good information there, but it might take us a little while to figure that out. So that's really exciting to get the 2-plate system. And then Swing Catalyst has been, and a partner of Swing Catalyst has been working on a markerless motion capture system. So Swing Catalyst is always synced with video, right? So you can sync up to 4 video cameras. Really cool. I was just doing a Zoom call with John Dunnigan the other day, and he has the face on, down the line, a butt cam, and above from above. So there's a camera above your head so you can see, which is really cool. But basically just using those same cameras that people have been using with their Swing Catalyst forever, we're going to be able to do markerless motion capture, which will give us a 3D rendition of the human. So previously to do 3D motion capture, you'd have to put markers all over you like a K-vest or a gear system. This is going to be 100% markerless. So the person will just be able to step on the plate and hit, and we'll get some 3D information from it. The first thing we're looking at, which has become really talked about in golf swing, is the center of mass. So this thing will be able to actually measure where all your segments are in space as you're swinging. So then the calculation of center of mass, I think, will be a lot more accurate. And where those forces are acting off the ground relative to your center of mass is pretty important because it creates some torques and moments to help determine how you move. And where those forces are relative to where your joints are is really important in terms of the stresses you're putting on your joints. So once that system gets released, we're going to be learning a ton more about that as well. So the 2-plate system and the markerless motion capture are going to be very useful. So those are something we've been working on. And then it was interesting through COVID, Swing Catalyst is a Norwegian-based company, and they had some government grants to keep small businesses alive in Norway. But you had to develop an offshoot or a new product or a new thing. So to apply for some of these grants, they needed a new product or a new offshoot business or something like that. And so Swing Catalyst has always had a offshoot company called Motion Catalyst, where we wanted to apply force plate and pressure plate technology to assessing human beings. So whether it's in a physical therapy setting or in a gym setting or whatever, there's a lot of other companies that have done that, but none of them have synced video. So you can't watch the person do it. You just get the force information. And none of them have 3D motion capture synced with it as well. So Swing Catalyst applied for one of these Norwegian grants to advance this motion capture or this motion catalyst company. And so we've been working a lot with some of our partners on using our force plates and doing jump testing and squat testing and balance testing and things that could be useful in testing just the capabilities of the human being, never mind if they're a golfer or not. So that's something we've been working on as well. And I think this could be a big sales pitch for Swing Catalyst, because now, you could probably, if you're a golf instructor and you work with a physical therapist, which most of them do, or you work with a strength coach, which most of them do, now you have a system that can help all of you help people better. So it could be because Swing Catalyst is not cheap, and a lot of golf instructors just on their own, it might be too expensive for them. But if they partner with a physical therapist and a strength coach, and you all have a system that you can use to help people, it could be a lot more useful. So that's where we've been going down that road. So a lot of new stuff. And as I said before, Swing Catalyst has been doing very well through COVID, because, I think, golf instructors have been teaching a lot of lessons, and that's one industry that has probably been positively affected by COVID. And so we've been able to do a lot more stuff with the extra sales that we have coming in. So it's kept us super busy, which is a good problem, I guess.
That's a lot of toys out there for golf instruction.
There are a lot of toys, but I think to me the the important part of the toy is the education to teach you how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a bad business model for any kind of technology or any kind of toy is say, hey, here, have this thing, figure it out. Good luck to you. And that's kind of what Swing Catalyst was when I first started. It was like, hey, look at these pretty pictures and these nice graphs. Good luck to you. And most people are like, all right, how do I use this thing to make somebody better? And so the education and the research, I think, is essential to making these toys and these gadgets and these pieces of technology useful. And I think we've done a pretty good job. And I think that's why, I think a credit to the work we've done with ground reaction forces, all the companies that have now come up. So there's S2M now, and there's GASP, and there's other companies that are all coming into the market, which is a good thing because I think that pushes us all to get better.
Yeah, the competition really does.
Competition does. some people are like, GASP is doing better now. And I'm like, great, that's awesome, because now we need to get better. And we need to push ourselves to learn more and get better. And so, I never shy away from competition because it just pushes the whole industry to get better and learn more and keep pushing forward.
One thing I wanted to touch on, and it kind of goes back to your work with the orthopedics. If somebody might have been wondering, if you're into ground reaction forces and golf and the orthopedic part you touched on, where everybody's facets are different. There's different range of motion between your lumbar spine, your thoracic, and your cervical. I listened to you on the Barbell Shrug podcast, and one thing I found very interesting, because, let me give it a little background, is you do a lot of work or had done a lot of study and training, and you kind of touched on that a little bit, about weightlifting and things like that, right? If I'm not mistaken. But on the Barbell Shrug podcast, you were talking about single pattern movements, which, like, I think your example is a track person that's always turning to the left. Obviously, a golfer would fall into that category. They're always swinging one way versus, say, a football or basketball player where they're moving laterally, forward, backward, all different ranges. So to mitigate the imbalances and ultimately avoid injury, what types of things do you see or believe that golfers should be doing or recommend to golfers?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know the answer to that question because at that point, the Barbell Shrug podcast, I think, was done. I don't even remember.
A couple of years ago, yeah. I still found it very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think and like I said with Mike Adams' book, right? Anytime I think something now, months or weeks or years later, I might learn something that. At that point, and still, I have been doing a lot of research into the functional movement screen and some of Gray Cook's stuff that, he was really instrumental in developing the TPI screens with Greg Rose. And one thing that I learned from them is, imbalances are not good. He always said that, hey, if I do a lunge on my left and I do a lunge on my right and it's way better on my left than my right, I'm at a high risk of injury. And we've always assumed that an imbalance right to left is a risk of injury. And I thought that, that made a lot of sense to me, and I think that's a good thing. But I do some work also with some NHL hockey teams, and we've been working, before COVID, we've been working with the Anaheim Ducks quite a bit, and we do a bilateral vertical jump with all the players. So we look at, when they do a maximum effort vertical jump, how much force is coming out of each foot, how much total force are they creating, and all this stuff. And the first time we did the testing, there was one player who had like a 75-25. So as they went to produce their maximal force, it was like 75% from one foot and 25% from the other foot. And I was like, ooh, this guy's at high risk of injury. So I put a big circle and star around him. And I'm like, when I meet with the management, I've got to make sure I tell them about this guy, because we've got to make sure we get this guy balanced and do some work with him, or else he's going to get hurt. And so I got in front of the management and I was like, yeah, this one player, you can see this big imbalance. Like, I think he's at a high risk of injury. And they all kind of look at me funny and they're like, that's Andrew Cogliano. And I don't know if you know anything about hockey, but he's like the Iron Man of hockey. He played like 800 games in a row and never got hurt. He lost his record. So he missed a game because he high-sticked a guy in the head and got suspended. So that was the only, but he didn't get hurt. And so I worked with the team for another 3 or 4 years after that, measured him every time. He was always the same, never got hurt, played every single game. So there might be something inherently about people's structure or what they have to do every day where a certain imbalance could work for them. And so that's something I got to think some more about. I know Ben Shear's working hard on a golf training program where he's talking about, hey, if you're a glider, you want to do these types of exercises in the gym, which would be more frontal plane, like slide board type things.
you're a rotator, that's where or a spinner, you want to do some more of these things. And if you're a jumper or a vertical player, you want to do some more of these things. And I don't know, I think there can always be too much of a good thing, right? So if I'm a glider in the gym and I glide all day on the range and then I go to the range or I go to the gym and I do some slide board stuff, is that just too much glide? Did I just take the whole bottle of aspirin?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer to that. There's got to be a fine line there. And so, maybe if I'm a glider on the range, if I want to stay healthy and I'm hitting tons of balls, then I want to do some rotational stuff in the gym to stay healthy and to give me the variety that I need to stay healthy. That might be something, and I think it really depends on what point you are or where you are. Like, so in the off season, a golfer who's a glider might want to do a lot of gliding because they're probably not hitting a whole lot of balls, and that's going to add to their power. And whereas during the season, when they're already, hitting 100 balls before their round, playing around, hitting some balls afterwards, and doing a ton of golf stuff, then they might want to do some different kind of training. So I think that's something we really got to think about, and make some better educated decisions about that. But I do know that, I think variety is good for health of joints. I just know that if you do the same things over and over again, that you will eventually get injured because you're using the same joint through the same range of motion, which is putting all the tissues in the same or under the same types of load. And so getting different loading on tissues will help us stay healthy. And that's something that's come from Shirley Sarman, who is a physical therapist who's considered to be kind of the pioneer of the kind of movement pattern detection to avoid injury kind of area. And she always says, what we need to stay healthy is variety in our movements and postures. And variety in our movements and postures for a golfer could be as simple as, trying to add variety to your practice, right? Try to hit a cut, try to hit a draw, try to hit it high, try to hit it low, so that kind of thing could give you two benefits: one, helping you play better, and two, helping you stay healthy. And rather than trying to do the same things over and over and over again. So that's a question I don't know the answer to. I thought I was closer to knowing the answer to that question until we did that testing with the Anaheim Ducks, where I'm like, well, maybe not. So I think there are some imbalances in some individuals that could be beneficial. And interestingly enough, with Andrew Cogliano, he got traded to the Dallas Stars. And so he left the Ducks, and we don't know what he did. And within, I think, months, he was hurt with the Dallas Stars. So who knows? Maybe he went over there, they tested him and tried to get him more balanced, and where we just left him alone and said, hey, it's working. Let's keep doing it. And I think that's something that, through the work I've done with elite athletics, we've learned the most from people getting hurt. And I think that's the way you learn the most, is from failures, right? From people getting hurt, or from,
Absolutely.
Me not helping Von Taylor very much. That's where you can learn the most, is in failure. Yeah. Winning teaches you, not as much, I don't think, or doing good things. So, so these are questions that are burning a hole in my head, and sometimes keep me up at night that we're trying to get.
They
close
keep
to
you
the
going
answers.
too, so don't try to minimize those. It's what fuels the fire.
Totally, 100%. Yeah, that's what keeps you going, to try to keep learning, and I don't think we'll ever know 100%. There's just too much variability in humans to know 100% of the time what's the best. So, but we can just get better at making decisions.
With the modern distance craze that's run rampant through golf, and I shouldn't say it's run rampant, but Bryson created it. Kind of got into Rory, or that's admittedly, he said, he let that affect his game. But you talk like Cameron Champ says, I hit it long enough, I'm not going after that. DJ, the same thing. Maybe there's some guys out there who are doing it, but with the amount of, as you know, probably better than anybody, the amount of torques and the forces that are put through the body and loads, is that going to be detrimental to somebody's game long term?
Yeah, I don't think we know the answer to those questions. I think if anyone is not going to leave a stone unturned, it would be Chris Como, and with Bryson, working with Bryson. I'm sure, they have people talking about his nutrition. They have people talking about I'm sure they have experts in, physical training, experts in physical therapy. I'm sure he's got every piece of that being looked at and being examined. But I think, even with all of that cerebral thought and effort and doing the best they possibly can at the time, we don't know the answer to that question, right?
It
might be possible
might not have the information. Nobody knows.
It could be possible that he breaks down and has a horrible back, or gets injured in
several years. Who knows? Or maybe he's done everything perfectly for him. But that doesn't mean that somebody else could take the exact same program and do the exact same things as him and be drinking those shakes every day, and and they wouldn't get hurt. So I think it's great for the game. I think getting people talking about the game and getting people excited about the game and getting him smashing it so far, and having some courses that he can dominate and some courses that he still get him. I mean, I think it's great. The whole thing is awesome, and I think we're going to learn from it. I think a lot of people and it's just like when Tiger was good back in 1996, and I went for that lesson, and the golf teacher tried to get me to look more like Tiger. I think, people are going to go down the path where they're going to try to do more like Bryson is doing, and it's going to lead to bad things for them, even though it could lead to good things for Bryson. So that's the part of humans, right? We're all humans. We're all built differently. We all learn to move differently. We all have different nervous systems. I mean, Bryson is an incredible athlete. There is no doubt about that. And he's going to be able to do some things that other people are not going to be able to do. But we could take little pieces of it and learn from it. I mean, I've done a lot of work recently with George Gankis here in LA, and the things that Matt Wolff does. Previously he was winning tournaments and doing well, and now he's shooting 80 and not doing so well. And
right, I've been watching that. I figured it was either the sophomore jinx, where he's had just a internal, doesn't have the push because he did have success, or it's I think George had on Instagram there's something, or Matt had said they were making a tweak in his swing. Maybe they had the ball behind. I think they had a couple of videos of Matt's swing at Westlake, and I said, hopefully it works. I mean, I hope all the best. Seems like a great kid, and I hope they get it sorted out.
Yeah, and there's just so many things at that level that could cause him to play poorly, and so it could be absolutely nothing mechanical. Who knows? And that's where I think he's an unbelievable kid, and I think George is an awesome guy, and I'm sure they'll figure it out because he's such an incredible athlete. But people will watch that crazy swing and say, "Oh, that's nuts!" Like no one ever going to say, "Oh, I want to copy exactly." Well, maybe some people will copy exactly, but there's little pieces of it that I think are useful for some people. So some of the things he does. I actually had a guy that I was working with in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, I guess it was now, and he has. Don't remember if it was an injury or as a neurological condition, but he basically has no glutes on his left side. So his glute med basically doesn't exist. So if you put him on a downhill lie, he cannot do he can't not do a Gary Player walk-through drill. Like literally every time he hits it, he has to walk through it because he has no brakes on his left hip. And so adding some horizontal push or adding any kind of push out of his left leg just wouldn't work. And so we were working on some Gankis stuff, kind of, where we had them kind of sit down and drop the bucket and use that right leg more to create rotation. And it's something that literally giving him some Gankis or some Matt Wolff type feels really helped that guy because he could use his right leg more because his left leg didn't work. So I think there's little pieces of what every single golfer does that we can use to either help us or hurt us. And so you got to pick the right pieces. And everybody's different. And so, and I think my goal with the science that I'm doing is to try to give people more direction in that rather than just being a trial and error thing. Hey, Gank is pretty cool. Let me try some of that. If we have a system that we can put you through where we can assess your structure and your movement pattern and say, hey, Matt Wolff is not for you. Don't try anything close to Matt Wolff. You need to swing it closer to, JB Holmes, or you need to swing it closer to Cameron Champ or whatever. Because to me, that's the path that I've gone down, and all of it. I mean, I would have gone down that path if it weren't for meeting Mike Adams and learning his system, because he's the first person that kind of introduced that concept to me, and I think it's where we need to go.
And it's amazing that there are great teachers out there, and all of them are good. And some of the, as I was coming up, and I'm pushing 50, but it was a lot of the discussion. If you'd ask somebody that was an old timer, why do you teach this? And they, well, that's the way I was taught, and there wasn't any quantifiable way to justify it, which I probably drove a number of very good teachers crazy, and always like a 4-year-old kid, I kept asking why.
Right.
That's just the way my mind worked. But nowadays, I mean, there's so, as we alluded to this entire show, that there's so many different ways people are built, and so many different variables and swings and ways you could or should swing, and it's evolving every day in today's technologically advanced society. The easiest way I try to explain it to some students is, everybody's grandmother made the best apple pie.
Yeah.
And if like I used to watch my grandmother make hers, and there were no measuring cups or measuring spoons. It was a handful of flour here, and then she'd roll the dough, and then another couple pinches. No, that's not quite. And then pinch of this, pinch of that, and it was all done by feel, and it would come out perfect every single time.
Yeah.
And I sit there and try to follow recipes, and it doesn't even sniff it.
No. Yeah. And I think that's where the motor learning comes in too. That piece of it, because like you say, like you and I could do our Mike Adams assessments and we could get the same ingredients. Like we both need more glide, we both need more under grip, we both need more rear post or whatever. But the way that we get there to make it work for us could be different, right? Because this drill might work for me and not work for you. And so the cooking component, not just the ingredients component. And I think Mike's really good at getting the right ingredients. And then the next phase becomes getting the right drill to make that happen in that person. And that's the cooking component to it. So I don't think we'll ever stop learning in that area. So it's super fun for me to work on this area, because obviously it's helped my own game, which is, I always tell people that's the reason I do this, really. I mean, who cares about everything else? If it gets me to play better, then I'm in. And so, that's the problems we're trying to solve. And I think, if you have a better little checklist, if you can test yourself and figure out what you need in your swing, I think that's the best start, because everybody needs something different. And I think, Mike's the first one to go down that path. And I think every good golf instructor does it. Like, you watch George Gankis teach on Instagram and you think he always does, his Gucci thing or whatever. But when you actually watch him teach in person, it's not that way. He does, okay, well, this guy needs a little more of that, a little less of that. This guy needs a little less of that. And a lot of them, have it in their heads. And I've watched Sean Foley teach a whole bunch of times, and he kind of, I watch him sometimes, and somebody will hit a ball and he'll close his eyes and just listen to the impact, and they'll be like, no, I don't like that. Let's try something else. Mm-hmm. And so they have, they don't teach everybody the same thing. They do work through a little system in their head, but I've watched Sean Foley teach, and I can't understand how he gets from A to B, right? With the way his brain works, I'm like, oof, I could never quantify how he did that. But they leave and they're hitting it better, and everything went well. And whereas with Mike, I can really understand his system. I'm like, okay, if this, then this, if that, then that, and that's something that, as a scientist, I can get behind. Because every good teacher, there's no way you could get to being where those guys are, where George Gankis is, Sean Foley is, Mike Adams is, without being able to help more than one type of person, right? They have ways. And if you look at, Sean's players, like look at Cameron Champ, look at Justin Rose, look at Danny Willett, they all swing it different. Look at Lydia Ko. They all swing it different. Yeah, they all swing it different, but he makes it work for all of them. So he does have a system of teaching differently to different people. It's just Mike's is one that is really kind of defined, and as a scientist, I like that better, because I can wrap my head around it a little bit easier. It's not just somewhere in your brain how those things, how those algorithms are working. So yeah, I think all good teachers have that, and I think that's where we need to go. And my scientific brain, I kind of gravitated a little bit more towards Mike Adams, because I could quantify it a lot easier, right? Because he had these little tests he put people through, and it made a lot more sense to me how he made his decisions.
What since you work with the Anaheim Ducks and the hockey, what is it about hockey players that they either love golf or their profession is very adaptable to golf? Like I know here, Ron Wilson, the coach, he lived here, or he still lives here. He used to play. He was a great golfer. The Messier family lived on Hilton Head, they had a house for a number of years. And it's like all these hockey. Let's see, Robert Lang lived here in the off season. Yeah, and they're always good golfers.
Yeah, it's funny. Ron Wilson my brother works for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and so he was good friends with my brother. He knows Ron Wilson very well. So I think it's interesting. I have these hypotheses about this, but hockey is hitting an object with a stick, right? And golf is hitting an object with a stick, and so they're kind of relatively similar things. But the interesting thing to me is because I played hockey growing up, and we used wood sticks. Mm-hmm. And with wood sticks, you actually had to hit the puck first. And that's why I think a lot of older hockey players are good golfers. But now they have these composite sticks where when I first started using them, all the kids on my team were like, no, you're doing it wrong. Like, you literally have to hit it fat.
So with these new composite sticks, you drive the stick into the ice just behind the puck, and the stick flexes, and then it snaps into the puck and just shoots it like a rocket. I was like, wow, this thing like shoots it for you. Like I don't even have to do anything. And so my hypothesis is this new era of hockey players are going to be terrible golfers because they've been literally hitting it fat their whole life using these new sticks. But yeah, I think it's a very similar thing. I mean, I think golf is, in some ways a hair easier because you don't have a big dude trying to smash you while you're trying to hit this thing with the with the stick. So yeah, and I think it's you've seen other really good athletes in other sports like Charles Barkley be awful at golf.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a way that we can still be competitive and still kind of get the juices flowing for competitive people. I think after they're no longer able to play hockey or football or whatever. But I think the pure act of hitting something with a stick, and the object being on the ground versus a baseball player who's not hitting the ball on the ground generally. I think there's some good transfer there. Between hockey and golf, but my hypothesis is that the new era of hockey players aren't going to be very good golfers to start with because the mechanics of the game has changed. The mechanics of shooting a puck has changed since these new sticks have been developed. So we'll see if I'm correct or not. But if we get a whole bunch of current era hockey players who become really good golfers, then I may be incorrect, and maybe it's just a motion pattern that's important.
Martin Chuck had messaged me when I told him you were coming on and said he wanted me to ask you about the Maple Leafs and if he should book his ticket back for the parade.
It's funny. We always joke in Toronto. So the main street in Toronto is called Yonge Street, and if the Leafs ever win a Stanley Cup, there will be a big parade down Yonge Street. And my buddies and I in Toronto. I mean, I'm 40-something years old, and the last time they won the cup was 67. So 10 years or so before I was born was the last time they won, and they win the first couple games of the season. Everyone's like, plan the parade. We're going to do it this year. There are hardcore hockey fans in Toronto, and me being one of them. And my brother actually works for the team. He's the director, or he does all the travel, and I think they call him the director of hockey operations. So
Mm-hmm.
he's really close with everything that happens there. And they have a really smart general manager, this new guy, Kyle Dubas, who they have, and a younger guy who gets in a lot of the analytics and gets into a lot of the science and makes very educated decisions versus, I think old hockey guys just did it kind of on feel and who knows? I mean, I think
kind of what the way baseball did.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think he's a lot more towards that. And, some old school people are like, oh, he's an idiot. He shouldn't do that or that. So who knows? I live and die with them. So hopefully Martin Chuck is correct, and he and I will be home attending the parade on Yonge Street later on this summer. So, but you never know. I mean, especially this year because they've rearranged the divisions now because of COVID, because none of the Canadian teams can cross the border, so they're all just playing each other. So the Toronto team is doing very well this year, but I don't know if it's just because the rest of the Canadian teams aren't very good. So you only have how you're doing relative to the other 5 teams in your division, where they haven't played any of the other teams in the NHL. So it just might be that they're playing against a bunch of teams that aren't very good, and that's why they're good this year. But who knows? Maybe that's just my pessimistic, being 40 years of disappointment talking. So who knows?
Well, there's hope. But I mean, look at Cleveland with LeBron and the basketball.
100%. And then, I think the closest analogy would be the Cubs.
Right. The Cubs were another
all
one.
the years of just awfulness and then eventually coming through. And if the team ever does end up winning, I mean, Kyle Dubas and the coach, the new coach they just got in, and, they'll just be gods in that city. They'll be, everybody will just go crazy. I mean, everybody jokes they're going to have to shut down the city for probably a week or so if they ever win, because everybody will be partying. Yeah, it's everybody. The city really has got behind the Raptors, and there's a lot of really big fans. And when they won a couple of years ago, it was big, but I don't think anywhere near what it would be if the Leafs ever get back to that point, which I'm hoping they do at some point in my lifetime.
Just not to pivot too hard, but getting back just a little bit to as we wrap up time, we're getting close to the end of the time. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you have important things to do. Most things in you had mentioned what Swing Catalyst is in the process of coming out with, but going forward in the future for either the technological side and the measurement side of what you guys are doing, or golf in general, it's if you look at kind of a scope of history, a lot of the newer things come from the periphery, and I think it's because a lot of people who are in the middle of the whatever industry it is are so focused on what they're doing that they don't, that you can't, it's hard to have focus and a grand vision simultaneous, right?
Sure.
So is there anything that you see that might be coming in? Well, it used to be 3 to 5 years, but in today's world, it might be 3 to 6 months. But let's say in the next couple years could really be game changing.
I mean, I think the closest thing that I've kind of experienced, and I think I'm guilty of being one of those people, like you say, the scientists that learn more and more about less and less. I'm guilty of being in the middle of things and maybe not looking outside the box. But the closest thing I think that's going to be kind of a new venture in golf, or new information to golfers, will be the motor learning stuff. The stuff that Will talks about is stuff that, I think golfers are still butchering and not doing a very good job of implementing in their practice, and how they work on their games, and how teachers teach the game. So I think that's something that we could really do a lot of work on, and that could really help the transfer, because every golf teacher I've ever seen can make the person better in the lesson, right? They leave hitting it better than they did at the start of the lesson. But then every golf teacher that I've ever seen, you can tell stories of where I hit it great with him, but then the next day I had no idea, or I hit it great with him, and then on the next tee, or the first tee the next day I had no idea, or I hit it great on the range, and then when I go to the tee, I'm terrible. These are the problems I think that motor learning can help us solve. Because I think we have a lot of good ingredients. The force plate and the motion capture systems and the launch monitors help us get a lot of better ingredients for our swings. But how to cook, like you say, your grandmother, that's something we need a lot of help with. Quantifying how it is that she made her pie is something that I don't think we really know. But I think it's the motor learning aspect that can get us better at that can give us better strategies to figure out the way that works best for us. And that's why I'm super interested, and I spend as much time as I can around Will and John Dunnigan and the people that are really digging into this area, because I think it'll really help a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm going to start to look into that, and I'll reach out to him to try to schedule him to come on and just learn more and get the information out there best I can.
That's awesome. I think that's what is needed. So we just got to keep moving forward, learning something new every day, and try to get better. What
do you have coming up that people can get online, watch your webinars? You have a lectures, product launch, or I know you have is the master's program that you're teaching, is that available online that people that are interested in pursuing that education?
I think the Swing Catalyst education is now 100% online. So we have a level 1 and a level 2 that are 100% online. So you can get through that through the Swing Catalyst website. Any live things I have coming up, I have a couple things in Germany that I'm doing for the German PGA. So that probably won't help too many of your listeners. But not too much coming out, because the live events are better in the off season for golf generally, in the colder months for the northern or the North American people. And so, I would say, probably the best information that's out there, the stuff that I've done most recently would be the Swing Catalyst Level 2 certification, which is online now. I think it's relatively cheap. I think they charge about $50 for it or something like that. The Level 1 is free. I did that a really long time ago, but I still think it's some good basic information. And then, things like this. I mean, I think a lot of people can Google, the Barbell Shrugged podcast or any of the webinars I've done. We had a bunch of webinars we did over the COVID break, or over the quarantine, where we got a bunch of, I think Sean Foley did one with me, and
I think Jonathan Yarwood did one.
Yarwood did one with me. So
he's local too. I mean, we got smorgasbord of coaches here.
You do. You got a good golf area there. Too bad you lost Jason Bale. He's one of my favorites. But Southern Florida gained a good one there. But So I think just looking up that stuff, and I mean, if people have any questions or any burning things they want to talk about, I mean, getting in touch with me would be great, because I enjoy talking to golfers and golf instructors all the time, because I learn new things and maybe learn different paths that I might need to go down and research a little bit more as well. So they can get in touch with me via social media or email or however they want to.
And I'll have, as always, in the summary and description, I'll have all the links to those things, and anyone just click on it and shoot you a note or give you a call, however the best way that they can reach you and get you guys connected.
That's great. Yeah. And I think you tried to call my office number, I think, this week. And obviously we're not allowed to be in our offices here in California. The campus is still shut down. So that's not the best way to get in touch with me. But yeah, email or social media is a good way. Twitter and Instagram, as always, has taken over a lot of people's worlds now. So that's the way a lot of us are communicating. So I resisted for a long time, but I'm on board now. So I check those quite often.
Perfect. All right, you ready for the emergency 9 rapid fire?
Perfect.
We'll wrap up and let you enjoy the rest of your day.
Sounds great. Fire away.
So Mike worked with you on your game. You played well enough, and you got in a PGA tournament and won, and you made the Ryder Cup, or in this case, the President's Cup. What would be your walk-up song to the first hole?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would have to go with, there's a band called the Tragically Hip, who are a Canadian band that probably not a lot of people have heard of.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd probably have to go with one of them. They're kind of the band that, like, when I think of my childhood and my kind of growing up, they're the band that I most identify with. So they have a song called At the 100th Meridian that I would probably use.
Okay. Oddest thing in your golf bag?
Sorry, hottest thing in my golf bag?
Oddest, the thing that's the most
thing
odd.
in my golf bag. Interesting. You know what it probably is? That's an interesting question. So my grandmother was born in a little town called Pittenweem, Scotland, which is just around the bay from St. Andrews. And so when I went back to St. Andrews and I played there, I purchased a ball mark fixer tool from St. Andrews, and also a little ball marker with a little magnet from St. Andrews. And I have that in my golf bag and use it whenever I play. Most people don't even use a ball mark repair tool anymore, right? You just use a tee or something like that. But that is always in my pocket when I play golf, the ball marker and ball mark repair tool from St. Andrews, just because I have that connection to my family and to golf. And so that's, I don't know if that's odd, but that's always
very cool
in my golf bag and always in my pocket when I'm playing.
What was just not to jump out of that real quick, but what was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read, I'm actually really into the e-books now, the audiobooks, just because I spend all my days reading scientific papers and reading emails, and I haven't read a book like a paper book in a long time. But I would say the last one that I listened to that I really liked was Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers. I thought that was really interesting in terms of his, and I know a lot of people get on Malcolm Gladwell. I mean, I know he
10,000 hours and
he misinterpreted the 10,000 hour thing or whatever. But I just kind of like how his brain works, how he takes in information from a ton of different sources, right? He takes in information from research, information from news articles, from historical stories, and he tries to make a point. And his point about talking to strangers is that we're awful at figuring out who humans are. He thinks we should abolish like the job interview, our job interview, because you don't really learn much. And one of the stories in that book that I found really interesting was kind of before World War II at the very start. I think it was the British who sent somebody to Germany to meet with Hitler, and he came back and said, "Oh, he's a great guy. We don't need to worry about all about him. He's there's no problem with him." Obviously, the guy made a pretty poor judge of character decision in that short period of time. So, yeah, I really enjoy Malcolm Gladwell's books just because they make you go. I mean, he has the one podcast that I listened to or read where he thinks golf should be abolished. He thinks we should turn all golf courses into parks, and he makes a very. I mean, and I'm a golf nut, but when I saw that, I was like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Yeah,
but then you listen to it,
down
and you're like, well, he makes some interesting points. And one point that he makes is St. Andrews, which is one of the most famous golf courses in the world, is a park on Sundays. You can walk your dog, you can, and he says maybe we should do that with more golf courses instead of having these big walls with guards and barbed wire around it. Maybe make it a park on the weekends or on a one day a week or something like that. I mean, to me, it's an interesting point. And the fact that I went out to St. Andrews one day, we were driving past and it was a Sunday, and yeah, everyone was out there walking their dogs and using it as a public space, which is interesting to me. So I don't know. I love golf. I mean, I disagree with his point that we should turn them all into public parks, but maybe there's a way that we can meet in the middle somewhere and make some of these gorgeous spaces that we all get to experience as golfers available to more people. So who knows? But yeah, I think that Talking to Strangers book is one that that made me think a little bit, that I've listened to recently.
Yeah, generalists are very interesting because they take an amalgamation of a bunch of different things and put it together and come up with theories or ideas, and it's fun to read and listen and hear what they have to say.
Sure, and even if at the end of it you're like, that guy's an idiot, then you learn something from it, so that's fine.
Good. Let's see. If you could buy stock in any player over the next 5 years, who would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, after this weekend, it'd have to be that young kid, Zalatoris. I mean, unbelievable the way that he performed out there, and it just seemed like pressure was nothing to him. I mean, making putts. That putt he made on the last hole, 18th hole, there was incredible. He just stepped up there and rattled it in there. It had some good speed too going by. I mean, for a kid like that, if you miss that putt and then miss the one coming back, it costs you $1 million probably.
Wow.
And,
You're right.
whatever. He's. I mean, to me, that is something you can't teach. That kid's got something special, and I think we'll be. I mean, hopefully we see a lot more of him because he was fun to watch last weekend.
Let's see, bucket list golf course. What's your number one bucket list course?
My number one bucket. I mean, that's tough. I'd have to say. I mean, the one that's the toughest to get on, obviously, Augusta National would be a dream come true. But it's interesting to me how, as I talked before about Malcolm Gladwell and him wanting to make golf courses a little more open to other people. I've had the most fun playing golf at places like Torrey Pines or Bethpage Black, or I played Harding Park in San Francisco this summer. These courses that are U.S. Open or major championship golf courses where like guys are rolling up in their sweatpants, and it just feels like regular people out there having fun playing golf. And I tend to gravitate more towards that type of place rather than a really snooty kind of stuffy old place like I'm sure National is. So I don't know. That's a tough question to me. I've just had so much fun playing those types of courses. I mean, to me, the vibe around Torrey Pines or Bethpage Black or Harding Park is something that I think we need more of in this game, just where everybody can come out and experience these awesome places and get to love this game that we all love so much.
There was a course like that not far from Hilton Head, probably an hour from Hilton Head, called Penny Branch. And the family that owned it, they had, I don't know if they had a solder farm on it and some trees. And they had, many years ago, they had converted it to a golf course. They ran it. The one son, Chris McKenzie, he was the super, and he ended up getting a job in Columbia, South Carolina. But the greens, the course from the tips was maybe 6,500 yards.
Right.
But they had these huge undulating greens, and they always kept them immaculate, and they were fast as can be. And that was the thing at Penny Branch. And for Hilton Head, you've been here enough, there's houses around every golf course. Well, up there were no houses. None. Right. And we would go get groups and go up there on the weekend, and the parking lot would be full of pickup trucks usually. And the quick story is one of the guys we went on a Sunday once, and he wanted to get a couple drinks, for Bloody Marys or something. The girl says, well, you got to be a member to have alcohol on Sunday. He's like, okay, I guess I'm going to pass. She goes, no, you can become a member. And he said, well, how much is it? And she said, $10. So, that's the kind of place it was. But I hated that they closed. They ended up shutting it down.
Yeah, there's a lot of economic issues, obviously, with being able to have a nice golf course like that and still have it available to the public. And my ideal situation where the course could be a park on Sundays, with some people probably not taking care of the grounds and maybe doing some bad things to the golf course may be impossible, but somehow it works in Scotland. I don't know how it works. I mean, I feel like Scottish people are just kind of born with golf etiquette somehow.
Right.
I was telling people when I was playing the 17th there that the one time I played there, I pushed my second shot onto the road on 17, and there's people walking all over the place, and literally they parted as if there was like a marshal there, and they like were quiet as I chipped, and they gave me an applause after I chipped it onto the green. And actually, I nipped it right perfectly off the road on 17 and put it up to a couple of feet. And this guy came out of the crowd after they applauded for me, and he's like, "Hey, I just filmed that on my phone. Do you want me to give it to you?" So he sent me the video. So I have a video of me chipping off the road on 17. So I think there's a way to do it. I don't know how it could be done, but yeah, imagine going to LACC or one of these fancy clubs in LA and saying, "Hey, you're going to be at Park on Sundays." I doubt the membership. I doubt the membership would go for that, but there's got to be a way to meet in the middle somewhere. And I think, the USGA promoting and doing their tournaments at courses like Bethpage and like Torrey, I think is a good thing, because, this is the course that, you and your buddies can go out and tee it up at any point, and then you can watch Tiger play there on TV as well. So, or maybe not anymore Tiger. Hopefully we get him back, but right. You can watch Rory and all those guys play there every year. So, yeah, I mean, I think having really good public courses like that, and the three vibes that I kind of like the most that I've played relatively recently are the Bethpage courses, all unbelievable golf courses. And, I played with a guy there. I just rolled up and joined a group, and the guy was wearing like sweatpants and like and then running shoes and stuff and whatever. He was actually a really good player. And so, that kind of, I think there's a lot to the traditions of the game and the etiquette and all that stuff, but I think it can get a little snooty and a little elitist sometimes as well. So ways to make that better, I think would really help us.
Cool. Let's see, a few more. If you could put any emoji on your club, what would it be? Stamped.
Ooh, I don't know. I would. It would probably be one of the smiley faces. To me, I have a lot of fun on the golf course.
That's good.
And so I think that's. I think too often, people get miserable out there, and I mean, none of us are making. I mean, I'm not making my living by playing the game, so the only reason I'm out there is to have some fun. And
right.
No matter how you play it, and I'm generally one of the more optimistic people. I could play brutal the whole round, but if I hit one good shot, that's the one I'll remember, and that's the one I'll think about, and just try to figure out how to get rid of those crappy ones too, and do the work to figure out why it did what it did that day. So it's a hard game. It's a really hard game. It's amazing. You watch, Dustin Johnson shoot a couple of 80s not too long ago, and you watch what Rory's going through right now, and these are guys the best in the world that lost their way. So it's can happen to the best of us. So
it mimics life, doesn't it? I mean, life's
totally.
You're not number one in the world every day forever, and you're not every day you roll out of bed is going to be roses.
Yeah, and you're going to get some bad breaks, and you're going to hit some bad shots, and that's why I love it. So, and as I said, that Congaree place and how they're using golf to help kids get education, and me being in education, I think that's a really good model that they're following there.
Let's see, Tin Cup, Caddyshack, or Happy Gilmore?
I got to go with Caddyshack. We were lucky enough to meet and play with Bill Murray last year. He came to a little Billy Getty, who's a golf nut, does a little think tank thing, and Sasha McKenzie goes, and my buddy Will Wu goes, and Mike Duffy goes, and for some reason Bill Murray showed up last year when we were there in Hawaii. So getting time to spend time with him and talk to him, he's an incredible human. He remembers everyone's name. He remembers stuff about you, and think about how many people that guy would meet in a.
No kidding.
And he just, when you're talking to him, it's like he's all in. He's listening. He's remembering things that you tell him. And so, yeah, that was a really special experience to get to see him. And so anything that he's in now, I'm all in, because he's a pretty special person.
Cool. That's a cool story. Let's see, two more. If you could caddy for anyone now or in history, who would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I would have to say my grandmother. She, as I said before, she grew up in Tittenweem, Scotland. Mm-hmm. She moved to Canada, and that's where my dad was born. And she was a golf nut. She was club champion at a course called the Toronto Ladies Club in Toronto. It's the only private golf course in North America that only females can be members at, which I think is pretty cool. And so, yeah, I would say her.
Very cool. Probably the best answer I ever got on that one. Last one, and I asked this to everybody. Greatest of all time, Jack or Tiger?
I mean, I saw Tiger in his prime. I wasn't alive to see Jack in his prime. I mean, I think I kind of remember, what was it, 85 when he won the
86 Masters.
86, yeah, 86. I was pretty young. I kind of remember that, but those days in around 2000, I mean, that's when I was playing a lot of competitive golf and I was really into golf. And those days when you would say Tiger or the field, and it would be like,
Right.
I don't know. That's unbelievable if you think about it. That, I mean, if that will ever happen again, I don't know. But I mean, Tiger or the field. I mean, I remember those pools we would have where we'd say you can't take Tiger because everybody would take Tiger. So he was like off the thing. We would have a pool and you're not allowed to take Tiger because, like, in Tiger or the field, like you think about it, there's 160 other guys out there whose job it is to play golf, and you would take this one. Like that was unbelievable how good he was. And so here's hoping that he'll be back out there at some point in the future playing again. But who knows? That was a pretty horrific injury he sustained. So, but hopefully he'll end up still being involved in the game, I'm sure, in whatever capacity he can. But I got to go with Tiger.
Yeah, there's one thing about him is no matter what he's going to get himself into, and we all hope he comes back, but if it's just not possible, whatever he does with the game, whether it's promoting kids golf or course architecture, I know he's into, he's going to do it to the best of his ability, and it's going to be something spectacular. Yeah,
and I heard somebody say that the last competitive round of golf that he played was with his son in that father-son thing, which everybody watched. I don't know anyone who's in the game of golf that didn't watch that.
Huge for that thing.
That was unbelievable. And if that's the last time we see him play competitive golf, it's a pretty good way to go out.
No kidding. Doctor, this has been awesome. I could sit here and talk to you for hours and hours some more, so I'll let you go if you make the promise that you come back on at some point and we could continue.
For sure, man. Anytime. This was super fun.
I really enjoyed it. You have a wonderful day, and I'll get you the links to everything as soon as it's all edited, and I'm sure everybody's going to love this one and learn a lot from what you had to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Yep. Have a great one.
Okay, bye now.
Bye. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you enjoyed it, you can find more information on today's episode and other topics at golf360.blog. There you'll find the show notes and links related to this episode, as well as any other episode that we've done so far to date. If you're interested in improving your game and would like to learn more from yours truly by taking a private lesson, a half-day or multi-day school, club or putter fitting, you can reach me through the blog site or by email, pete@golf360.blog. So some of you may be asking, what is the golf paradigm? All you have to do is click on the homepage while on my blog site to discover how you can start playing better than you ever thought possible. Or you can simply sign up, again, on the blog page for my instructional videos where I give regular tips on all areas of the game to include the swing, club design and fitting, health, fitness and nutrition, the mental aspects, and equally as important, the integration of all those things together. I'm also on social media, and you can find me at The Golf Paradigm. That's Paradigm, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, also under the same name, The Golf Paradigm. Facebook is usually the best way to reach me for questions and or comments, and I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say. This podcast is brought to you in part by Old South Golf Links. A short ride across a bridge from Hilton Head Island is one of the area's finest golf courses and a hidden treasure. Set up on towering pines and ancient oaks with sweeping marsh vistas, truly makes Old South Golf Links a one-of-a-kind golfing experience. The Clyde Johnson design was named one of the top 10 new public courses when it opened, and it also takes full advantage of the natural beauty of the Low Country. Old South is a fun and unique challenge for golfers of every skill level and a favorite of both locals and visitors. Whether it's your first time here or you're a regular, you'll be treated and feel like family. From the bag drop to check-in at the fully stocked pro shop with both men's and women's apparel, to breakfast or lunch before or after your round, the staff is always ready and willing to help. Experience for yourself why Old South is one of the premier golf courses in the Hilton Head area and why it will quickly become a favorite of yours too. Visit them in person or online at www.oldsouthgolf.com, or to make it tee time, simply call the pro shop at 843-785-5300. 5353.